Chapter 81. Yong-ho saw light beyond the darkness. It shined like the stars on a night sky, and as it displayed different colors, it created an image. Yong-ho was dreaming, and as he saw that light, he was suddenly aware that he was dreaming, and realized that this wasn't the first time he had experienced this. It was similar to when he had peeked into Kaiwan's memories. He looked into the light. The images that the light created became a vivid reality. A loon looked at me. No. A loon looked at me. It was an aerial garden that was built in the demon world. Among the red and blue-colored sky, purple was also mixed in, making it seem like the sky was painted. Chwiryong was standing in the aerial garden and was looking down. He chuckled when he heard the voices from the ground. They probably thought no one could hear them, but they were wrong. The aerial garden was created by attaching large, thick chains to an enormous floating stone. This aerial garden was one of the places that Mammon enjoyed resting in. The ones that were talking underneath the floating stone were wood elves, and they took care of managing the aerial garden. Right, so which one did you look at? Chwiryong asked while chuckling, and a frown appeared on the face of the woman that he asked. She just pointed to her eyes instead of answering. A red leather string was covering her eyes. The woman had long gold hair that went past her butt and was wearing a bright pink outfit. Overall, it was short and revealing. But its purpose wasn't to make her look more feminine. She liked it because it was comfortable and felt cool. She was a mix between a dragon and an elf, but she looked like an elf. The scale that was located somewhere on her body was the only dragon-like feature she had. This applied to most of Mammon's spirits, but she was pretty popular among the spirits that were in the house of Mammon. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was the most popular. The red string covered her eyes because she was blind. However, she had the ability to look at the world through a different method. A loon is contemplating whether to get rid of this good-for-nothing spirit that jokes around all day. No, really. He heard a cheerful voice. It belonged to a male, and this was the first time he had ever heard it. But the moment the sound touched Yong-ho's ears, he felt his soul tremble. It was the voice of Mammon, the king of greed. He wanted to turn around. He wanted to turn his head and look at Mammon's face, but he couldn't. Just like the time when he looked into Kaiwan's memories. His eyes were fixed, and the only thing he could look at was Chwiryong, who was busy laughing, and a loon, who was pouting. He heard laughter. Many different laughs that were mixed in with Mammon's. It was probably Mammon's spirits. It was a peaceful atmosphere. It was like looking at a harmonious family. A loon, who was still frowning, looked like she was going to say something, but in the end turned her head. Instead of using her eyes, she had a different way of looking at the world, and she noticed something approaching the garden. She expressed her discomfort when she heard Chwiryong's joke, "Shez coming." Shez by herself this time too. She tried to suppress her emotions, but a part of her was still on edge. Chwiryong and everyone else looked in the same direction as a loon. Yong-ho and Chwiryong both looked at the same thing. A woman was on top of the aerial garden. The wind was blowing around her red hair. Red. Yong-ho opened his eyes as soon as he had said it, and instead of looking at the garden, he saw the ceiling of his bedroom. After he had obtained 4 horns, he was able to see in the dark better and could make out the different patterns on the ceiling. Along with Kaiwan's, he saw Mammon's memory. Was it a memory that remained in the manner that he had absorbed in the arena? But still, then, how come he wasn't able to see Forus or Zhongshiros's memory? Of course, he would only feel uncomfortable if he did. Maybe Mammon's blood is the key for seeing these memories. He didn't plan on going to sleep. However, the exhaustion had forced him to do so. Instead of sleeping more, Yong-ho decided to get up from the bed. After briefly washing his face, he headed to the library. Kaiwan created the library for her younger brother. Even though Kaiwan enjoyed books, she had major responsibilities, so she wasn't able to really take her time reading the books that were in the library. She expressed her love towards her brother by placing high-quality furniture in the library. The library also had preservation magic, so the books looked brand new. Yong-ho stood in front of the bookshelf that contained books related to Mammon's spirits. Mammon's spirits were historical figures, and since they were the spirits of the most powerful demon king in history, they were quite popular. The winners of that period were usually lenient towards the dead. When the house of Mammon suddenly fell, the demon kings that lived in the same era as Mammon didn't get rid of or suppress his spirits. In the demon world, there were many stories and songs about Mammon's spirits. and there were several books about them as well. Cayenne liked these stories a lot. His journal contained many stories about Mammon's spirits. This one, Ilune, the one that cuts down the night. She was one of Mammon's spirits and, at the same time, one of the guards that protected Mammon's side. Even though she was blind, she was one of the greatest ever warriors, and the citizens of the demon world adored her by calling her the Witch of the Sword. There were a lot of stories about Ilune among Mammon's spirits. Ilune had great beauty, and even though she was blind, she was so strong that she was given the name Witch of the Sword. And since she was also in a romantic relationship with Mammon, it was obvious that there would be a lot of stories about her and death. After Mammon died, Mammon's spirits were sealed away. Some lost their lives, and out of those spirits, Ilune was the first spirit to have died. Even though Yong-ho saw her once in his dream, he thought it was really unfortunate. It may have been because he had told to Gusion only a few days ago. If he asked Gusion, assuming that Gusion would tell him the truth about her, he would be able to find out. However, Yong-ho already knew that Ilune was Mammon's lover anyway. The one that he wanted to ask about was the woman with red hair that had expressed her discomfort. He couldn't see her face. All he saw was her red hair dancing in the wind, but he was still able to tell Citri he was certain it was her. He couldn't think of anyone else other than her. Like Citri mentioned before, she wasn't one of Mammon's spirits. Then, what was her relationship with him? Was she another lover of his? Was that the reason why she was keeping a close eye on the house of Mammon? Because it belonged to the man she loved? Let's stop here. The more he thought about it, the wilder his imagination would become. Yong-ho grabbed the books that contained information about Ilune as well as Gusion. And then, Lucia spoke. Master Bugram finished the items that he's been working on. She must have waited until he finished grabbing all the books. After Yong-ho gave her several tasks, he exited the library and headed towards the workshop. Even though he was standing still as a rock, Yong-ho saw desperation in Bugram's eyes. Skull and Salami and Nightmare were having a staring contest. Skull raised its hammer to show respect towards Yong-ho. After being unified with the skeleton mage, Skull must have understood the idea of showing respect, because he didn't roll about on the ground as much as before. Salami also bowed, and to show that it wasn't going to lose to Salami, Nightmare copied and bowed its head as well. Yong-ho lightly nodded his head in response and approached Bugrim, who wasn't able to speak, bowed his head and handed one of the items that was on his work table. It was a well-made saddle. The saddle was created from the landworm's skin that Ophelia had provided, and the various magic, bones, and leather that were in the House of Foras warehouse. Even though Yong-ho was ignorant about these things, he was still able to tell that this saddle was very well made. Hers really talented. After checking the pouch and foot pedal that were attached, Yong-ho gave the saddle to Skull Bugrim, then handed Yong-ho a large saddle that was made for Salami. Even though Salami was just as big as Nightmare, its body was different, so an ordinary saddle wouldn't fit. Yong-ho happily took the saddle and approached Salami. Salami looked over at Nightmare once, and then kneeled on the ground after putting its wings down. When Nightmare saw Salami, it approached Skull. They must have become rivals while Yong-ho was away. The saddle changed the riding experience. There was a handle on Salami's back, so no matter how fast Salami flew, the rider probably wouldn't fall. The issue is what happens after the evolution. Salami would become physically bigger after it evolved. Bugrim may have to create a new saddle every time Salami did so. Skull also rode on Nightmare after putting the saddle on. He was pretty heavy since his body was made out of steel, but Nightmare didn't seem to be bothered by it. Or is Nightmare just enduring it because Salami was here? Yong-ho was going to have to search for Skull's next unison for Nightmare. The first thing he thought of was titanium, but he wasn't sure if there was such a thing as a titanium golem. It would probably be faster to find mithril or orichalcum. After getting off of Salami, Yong-ho looked at Bugrim. Even though he couldn't speak, Bugrim was able to communicate with his eyes, just like Kaiwan Lucia spoke, as if she felt bad for him. When he doesn't have any work, Hell trained really hard at the training ground. He must have heard that he needed to fill his development rate in order to get healed, but Yong-ho was the only one that was able to see his stats. The only thing Bugrim could do was work hard and train hard. Thanks to his efforts, his development rate was completely filled. Yong-ho activated the power of evolution without any hesitation, and placed his hand on Bugrim's bulky shoulder. Mana evolution. 12. Even though there was a green light, there wasn't a big difference. Yong-ho looked uneasy when he looked at Bugrim, and Bugrim looked at himself excitedly, but was soon disappointed. But it only lasted for a moment. Even though Bugrim's mana hadn't been fully recovered, his body was still in a better condition. Yong-ho immediately spoke to Bugrim. "I'm sure there will be good results after you get cured one more time. But don't overdo yourself." Bugrim excitedly nodded his head. He looked like he wasn't going to hold himself back. "I'm looking forward to it." Bugrim was able to make high-quality saddles without mana. He will be able to make amazing magical items once his mana recovers. Yong-ho had high expectations on defensive items far more than weapons, like magical armor. After Yong-ho told Bugrim not to overdo it again, he exited the room with Skull. Yong-ho stopped in the dungeon passageway. Usually he would rest up, because he was planning on completing the arena's second floor tomorrow morning. But he wanted to connect to the dungeon shop's virtual space first. He wanted to ask Citri about Gusion, Mammon's spirits, and the arena. He also wanted to know if Citri knew about Kaiwan being trapped in the arena. Since he could do this in the throne room, Yong-ho started walking. But right when he passed the bathhouse, there was an emergency. "Master, I received a report from the dungeon. Meerkat's Ophelia is currently approaching the dungeon at a fast pace. She's riding a monster that's able to fly instead of a horse. I think there's something wrong." Ophelia's visit to the House of Mammon was always kept a secret, but it was different this time. If she didn't obtain it while coming here, it meant that she had ridden that monster all the way from the Free City, which was an act that was quite noticeable. According to the conversation he had with Ophelia yesterday, she was planning on visiting 2 days later. What happened? Did she want to become a spirit that badly? Therese, no way. He was sure that something serious had happened. Lucia, Cor Eligor, Catalina, and Ricum to the dungeon entrance room were going out to meet Ophelia. "Yes, sir." Yong-ho rode on Salami while Skull rode on Nightmare. The two raced towards the entrance as if they were racing each other. Ophelia, the daughter of Endelion, would like to have an audience with the owner of the great House of Mammon. "We have a big problem." He must have caught their eye. Yong-ho looked towards the Free City again. Instead of answering right away, he replied with a nod. The Free City could be called a dungeon-less land. Like a dungeon, there were demons and beasts who all lived in one place and maintained their own order. It was the 3 dungeonless kings who ruled the Free City. The 3 kings had power equal to one another, and divided the Free City into 3 parts, reigning as kings in each of their districts. Of course, they did not have dungeons. So, in reality, they were not true kings, and the power under their command was not as strong as that of dungeon masters. But even so, they were the ones that ruled the Free City, a 3-man team. Among them, it was the owner of the pub who had asked Yong-ho to meet with them, the Red Demon Ophelia. Chapter 82. Ophelia, the daughter of Endelion, would like to have an audience with the owner of the great House of Mammon. "We have a big problem." As soon as she landed, she ran into the dungeon and quickly kneeled before Yong-ho. She stated the reason as to why she was here after quickly greeting him. "Calm down and drink some water." When Yong-ho handed her a cup of water, Ophelia became flustered but managed to take the cup. She spoke more calmly. "I apologize for showing that side of myself. I'm sure you had your reasons for acting that way." Ophelia's eyes widened, and then she displayed a bright smile for a moment when she heard him say that he trusted her. She spoke after activating the magic stone that she had already taken out. "I will explain the situation first." The small purple magic stone released a light and displayed a map in the air. It was the map of the empty land. A large number of owners in the West have unified in order to go against Embryo, while Embryo has also unified with troops in the West to go against them. A big war will happen very soon. There's a chance that Embryo's power will crumble through this war. Information was displayed on the map. There were about 11 houses that had unified to go against Embryo. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that almost all the houses in the West were participating. A fight between the North and West. As a spectator, it didn't matter who won. It wasn't going to be an easy fight, and the winner would definitely suffer some injuries. Or is this type of war different? That would often happen in fights between humans. But in the demon world, and between demon kings that ruled dungeons, the fights were a bit different. They may lose their spirits, but there's also a chance that the winner would become stronger after consuming the spirit of the defeated owner. This aspect of the battle was very important. If the group that fought against Embryo wins, it would put Yongho at an advantage. The war between the northern and western regions was so important that it would decide the future of the entire empty region. But Ophelia wouldn't have rushed over here just because of that. As expected, when Ophelia manipulated the map, instead of focusing on the northern and western regions, she instead zoomed into the southern region. While the northern and western regions are fighting amongst themselves, the owners in the eastern region are fighting amongst themselves instead of attacking Embryo. And one of the owners from that group is targeting the southern region. She zoomed in again. It was safe to say that she was only showing the southern region now. Thanks to you, Chwiryong and Foras disappeared at the same time. So it's safe to say that there's a gap in power. The house of Laura, the neighbor of the house of Foras, is keeping quiet, and the daughter of Chwiryong is having a hard time controlling her house. Out of the 3 houses that were around the Free City, one of them had disappeared while the other 2 were having a difficult time controlling their dungeons. The fact that Yongho brought down both Chwiryong and Foras hadn't been known yet, so it was obvious that there would be a gap in power. Some of the owners would want to take this opportunity to take advantage of the southern region. Agarez, an owner in the eastern region, is targeting the southern region. He is so strong that several owners have already surrendered their dungeons to him. The 3 dungeons that were located in the eastern region glowed at the same time. Those were the dungeons that Agarez was controlling. Is Agarez targeting the House of Mammon? Ophelia bit her lips when Yongho asked. She replied a few minutes later. In the end, yes, but Agarez is currently targeting the Free City. It was an unexpected answer, so Yongho tilted his head without knowing. Ophelia then explained further. Powerful owners with large dungeons tend to claim the areas around their dungeon as their territory. The Free City can be considered a place that doesn't have a demon king or a dungeon. It's definitely an appealing place. Yes, and there are a lot of spirits that are living in the Free City, and the Free City can also be used as a base when attacking the dungeons near it. The second explanation was probably the reason. The Free City was the perfect base since it allowed the attackers to attack the many dungeons that were near it. How are the rulers of the Free City reacting? As you already know, 3 powers exist within the Free City. The bar that I'm controlling, the group of outlaws, and the guild for workers. The leaders of the outlaws and the guild are saying that we should fight. As a spirit of the House of Mammon, I was planning on following your orders, but I've already told the 2 leaders that I agreed with their decision. He had an idea as to why Ophelia had rushed here. When Yongho didn't say anything, Eligor spoke carefully. I'm surprised the 2 leaders said that Yongho wasn't able to understand. After Eligor looked at Ophelia, he spoke to Yongho. It's obvious that they want to protect their position, but their life is on the line. I'm not trying to look down on Ophelia, but the rulers of the Free City believe that their life is more important than honor. They weren't owners or spirits that were tied to a certain location. If the opponent was too strong, surrendering was the best plan. Ophelia, who was one of the rulers, agreed. Eligor is right. Usually, they would think about surrendering rather than fighting for their lives, because Agarez really is that strong. But despite that, there's a reason as to why they've decided to fight. Ophelia paused. After gulping, she started to talk again. Agarez is a cannibal demon, has more of an evil spirit than a demon in human form. If the rulers surrendered to him, not only would he consume their spirits, but he would eat them as well, while those working under them would also share the same fate. All the owners that have already surrendered to Agarez have ended up that way. Surrendering was no longer an option if their life couldn't be saved. Yongho asked again, what about running away? They're rulers that have followers, and the Free City has been their homes for a long time. Running away without trying to fight is unreasonable. Ophelia was a spirit that belonged to the House of Mammon, and was also the owner of the pub. Because of that, she felt the same way as the other rulers. Agarez can be considered as the smaller version of Embryo. The owners in the southern region consider both as their enemies. Because of that, the 2 rulers are thinking about asking the owners nearby for their help. It meant that they were going to work together to fight against Agarez. Yongho looked at the map again. He didn't say it out loud, but he only saw one owner that was willing to help the rulers of the free city. Ophelia knew what Yong-ho was thinking about. Even if Ophelia wasn't a spirit that belonged to the House of Mammon, she probably would have been standing in this same spot. Like I've mentioned before, the daughter of Chwiryong is unable to control her house, which is unexpected, and there's a high chance that Laura will remain quiet. Most importantly, it's important to question whether the owner of the House of Laura even has the power to go against Agares. The powerful Foraz and Junkeras didn't exist anymore, but a new, powerful figure had emerged. The other two rulers are expecting a lot from the Demon King of Fire, and as we already know each other, I came here on behalf of the rulers of the Free City. According to Ophelia's information, Agares was a figure Yong-ho was going to have to go up against eventually. If the groups in the Free City became his ally, then this could be his chance. But Agares was targeting the Free City, not the House of Mammon. It wasn't a dungeon where traps were going to be installed in different areas. There was a high chance that this was going to be something like the Korean War. This was going to be totally different from the previous battles he had experienced. It was a big war between large groups. Ophelia, how much time do we have left until Agares attacks the Free City? I can't say exactly, but the earliest will be 10 days and the latest will be 15 days. She was thinking about the amount of time Agares needed to move his troops. Yong-ho then asked a different question. And what about the strength of the two groups? Are they similar to the pubs? They're pretty similar. Having a large amount of outlaws is an advantage, and even though the workers lack fighting experience, along with the Gigantes, they have several tools that can be used in the fight. Gigantes. It's a war weapon that can be driven with mana. You can think of it as a large living armor or golem. Yong-ho's eyes started sparkling when he heard the explanation, causing Ophelia to stop talking. Yong-ho coughed to stop daydreaming and then started counting. Before making a decision, he asked his last question. Ophelia, what do you think? Ophelia fixed her posture. She looked at Yong-ho with a serious expression. Agares is an enemy you're eventually going to have to face. I'm saying this as the spirit of the House of Mammon, not as the owner of the pub, but I recommend that you use the Free City and fight Agares. If you win this battle, you'll not only have taken Agares down, but the Free City will be in your hands. The other two rulers would have stood up if they heard this. Ophelia was thinking about what would happen after the fight with Agares. The other two rulers were thinking about the same outcome. However, unlike them, Ophelia showed her loyalty to Yong-ho as the spirit of the House of Mammon, not as the owner of the pub. Yong-ho looked at the others. Starting with Rickham, they gave their opinions. This is your chance to use the Free City's power. I agree with Ophelia. I'm worried because you have to go outside of the dungeon to fight. But I also agree. Rickham and Eligor agreed. Instead of giving her opinion, Catalina bowed to Yong-ho and spoke in a deep voice. I'll protect you with my life, sir. She was going to follow him no matter what kind of decision. Yong-ho looked at Skull last, and Skull placed the warhammer on his chest and roared. Skull. Yong-ho didn't know what he said, but he knew what Skull meant. Great. I'll meet with the rulers of the Free City. Ophelia, please prepare the meeting. Yong-ho gave his orders. The spirits that were in that room all bowed to Yong-ho. They replied loudly, Master, we will obey your commands. After hearing that Yong-ho was going to leave in 2 days, Ophelia immediately left the House of Mammon. Her job was to bring the two rulers to the meeting, as well as creating a defense. After seeing Ophelia leave, Yong-ho decided to rest. The situation was moving along fast, so Yong-ho had to move quickly as well. He would still have time to meet Citri after everything had been taken care of. Like Ophelia mentioned, Agares was going to attack in 10 days. 10 days was a bit tight since he had to negotiate with the rulers, as well as help with setting up the defense. Despite that, Yong-ho decided to leave 2 days later instead of leaving with Ophelia. It wasn't because the House of Mammon needed time to prepare for the battle. One day after Ophelia's visit, Yong-ho and Catalina headed to Kaiwan's break room. He opened the secret passageway that led to Mammon's arena he had one day. He wanted to get as strong as possible before encountering the powerful Agares and the other rulers of the Free City. The man wearing a beast-shaped mask guided Yong-ho. Once he arrived, Gusion, who was wearing a white suit, greeted him. You came earlier than I thought. Kaiwan needed a week to start the next floor. Gusyeong was slowly starting to annoy him. He was sure that Gusyeong liked him. Gusyeong actually had high expectations, unlike before. The reason why he mentioned Kaiwan was to provoke him a little and help him use more of his power. Although it was a relief that he didn't bring Kaiwan with him, he still didn't like Gusyeong. Someday he'll save Kaiwan and make Gusyeong one of his subordinates. Yong-ho glared at Gusyeong. He then revealed the reason for his visit. I would like to try the arena's second floor. Sure. Gusyeong pointed at the stadium while laughing. The second floor master was waiting. Chapter 83. The history of Mammon's arena was over 10,000 years old. During that time, many owners had challenged the arena, and Gusyeong had watched all of them. Yeah. They didn't seem to have that much trouble completing that floor. Gusyeong mumbled. He placed his hand on his chin and rolled his tongue at his mouth. Truthfully, there weren't a lot of owners like Kaiwan that struggled on the first floor and then somehow managed to complete the first floor. It took a really long time for the House of Mammon to fall. During the King of Greed's reign, the House of Mammon was strong, so fall was the best way to describe it. The house had failed when the previous two owners were ruling the House of Mammon. Objectively speaking, the owners of the House of Mammon were pretty powerful figures. In the demon world, when a house has power, it meant that they had a powerful dungeon and owner. That's why, excluding Kaiwan who challenged recklessly, owners usually started feeling frustrated on the 5th or 7th floor. But even if I take that into consideration, Gusyeong was looking at Yong-ho, who was standing in the center of the stadium by himself. He was consuming Mammon's mana with his eyes closed. Yong-ho beat the second floor master with one blow. He must have had experience fighting it before because the fight ended a lot cleaner than when Yong-ho was fighting the Steel Ox. Of course, being able to control Aemon is cheating. There were a lot of owners that succeeded thanks to their equipment. In that sense, Yong-ho wasn't anything special since Aemon was helping him based on his skill level. He's good, he's courageous, too. His fighting senses were good. He used both fire and coldness really well, and when his opponent charged, he didn't close his eyes or flinch. A warm smile appeared on Gusyeong's face. Yong-ho was the first one after Mammon to have the ability to naturally control the power of greed, and this made Gusyeong quite happy. While Gusyeong was judging Yong-ho, Yong-ho was slowly catching his breath. While he was consuming the mana, he had a similar but different thought from Gusyeong. I was lucky. The floor master of the second floor was the fiery figure. He fought against the fiery figure when the distortion appeared, so Yong-ho had used the same method and was thus able to beat the floor master with ease. The floor master was definitely stronger than the figure that jumped out of the distortion, but Yong-ho has grown a lot stronger since then. Is her strategy useless? Kaiwan's journal was extremely detailed. In her journal, she wrote all the floor masters that she encountered, along with their information and attack strategies. It wasn't for her. She made it for her younger brother, who would someday become a competitor after completely recovering from his sickness. Unfortunately, things didn't work out like she had written in the journal. He made that assumption when the floor master of the first floor was different, but the floor master of the second floor was different as well. It seemed like spirits with similar levels were randomly placed as the opponents. Anyways, it was an easy win. Yong-ho gladly consumed Mammon's mana and looked at Gusyeong. Yong-ho was urging him, and after Gusyeong smirked, he stood up and immediately approached Yong-ho. He waved his finger while grumbling, and 3 boxes of light appeared in front of Yong-ho. Okay, chew this one. Just like before, Yong-ho picked a box before Gusyeong finished his sentence. Gusyeong grumbled again. Hey, owner, why do you think there are several boxes? I don't know. I'm not interested. According to Kaiwan's journal, the quality of the rewards inside the boxes weren't equal. When she was lucky, she would continuously get good gear, but when she was unlucky, she would either get a small amount of gold or useless items. But that didn't apply to Yong-ho. Greed helped him choose the best one. You have a talent for picking. When Gusyeong grumbled again, Yong-ho immediately felt quite satisfied. He tapped the box of light with a satisfied smile and grabbed the item that was inside it. Glove. It's a magical glove. It can also grow. It's only the second floor and you managed to pick the best one. If you picked it just based on your instincts, then is it like an armor? Yongho naturally interrupted Gusion. Gusion explained with a frown on his face. Wear it. It can be used as an armor and as a weapon. I happen to have a similar item, so I'll show you a demonstration. Gusion took off the white suit jacket and gave it to the male wearing the beast mask. The silver glove couldn't exactly be called a gauntlet, but Yongho wore it on his left hand. When you pour your mana into it, it'll react. The final form of the magical glove is different for each one, but this is what it generally looks like. Gusion released his mana. It wasn't the same as the time when he tried to oppress Yongho. The mana remained on both of Gusion's fists. The red metal covered both of Gusion's arms and shoulders. Even though it was made out of metal, it was different from ordinary armor. His muscles looked like they were made out of metal. His hands were almost 2 times bigger, and he spoke while clenching and unclenching his fists. A growing magical glove. Horus, the divine punisher, was one of Mammon's spirits, and he made it. The magical glove grows when the owner grows, just like when the spirits grow when the owner grows. Yongho understood what he meant when he said it could be used as an armor and a weapon. Yongho poured his mana into the glove. The glove looked like it was made out of thin chains, and on top of it, there were silver plates. The glove covered his wrist, and since the metal covered his fingers and the back of his hand, it felt firm and gave a combative-like feeling. It's light. He could barely feel the weight. The sharp feeling that he got made it seem like the glove was part of his skin. Yongho looked at the glove with a serious expression, and Gusion spoke while looking at Yongho with a satisfied expression. You completed the 2nd floor without any issues. How about it? Want to try the 3rd floor? The punishment is looking at your most disgraceful memory. I think it's safe to say that this isn't really a punishment. Yongho imagined Mammon having a good time while watching his descendants' most disgraceful moment. He didn't know why they even made a punishment like that, but his life wasn't on the line. Like Gusion had stated, this couldn't really be considered a punishment. Yongho looked at Catalina, who was standing within the crowd. Since she was an elf, she had good hearing, so she must have heard what they were talking about, because her expression was telling him something. Sorry, he was greedy. Since it was different from when he completed the 1st floor, Yongho nodded his head. Sure, but can I take a break? Of course. Should I get you a waiting room? Gusion gladly agreed. Yongho nodded, since it would be best to get as much rest as possible. He waved his hand and signaled Catalina to come, and within that short moment, Yongho looked at the group that was sitting on one section of the seats, and then looked back at Gusion. He hesitated for a moment and then asked, Can I ask a question? I'm only going to accept one question, like you have stated. Gusion looked as if he wanted to get revenge on Yongho for being so blunt. Because they were constantly quarreling like this, the oppression and fear Yongho felt disappeared. Yongho looked at the audience again. Gusion looked at Yongho and recalled the information about Kaiwan. How many levels did Kaiwan complete? Are those people in the audience former owners of the House of Mammon? Those were some of the questions he was expecting. Which one was Yongho going to ask? Yongho turned around again. Gusion, who was quick-tempered, prepared the answers and waited for Yongho. Yongho opened his mouth. The answers in Gusion's head got erased immediately. Gusion, do you know a woman named Citri? Gusion couldn't answer right away. It was totally different from what he had expected before, and after putting on a fierce smile, Gusion spoke. He answered Yongho's question. The free city can be divided into 3 big powers. Ophelia was the owner of the pub, and also the head of courtesans, gamblers, and wanderers. Runaway spirits and mercenary soldiers were part of the outlaw group, while the Workers' Guild was made up of people that produced and worked in the manufacturing industry in the free city. The 3 groups weren't hostile towards each other, and instead of creating unnecessary fights, the leaders would often come together and negotiate. Of course, it wasn't like that in the beginning. This was possible because the 3 groups had an equal amount of power in the free city. And this balance didn't just happen. This was the result after many struggles and protests. The 3 leaders were gathered at the top of the gate. It's been about 10 years since the 3 leaders gathered together in an open area. Mad Oros, the leader of the Workers' Guild, had hands that were bigger than an ogre's and had a big cigarette in his mouth while displaying a frown. He had blue skin and was wearing a white gown that had energy marks all over it. He was a doctor as well as a pharmacist, and was the best alchemist in the city. But that doesn't erase the fact that he was a troll. He cut more flesh with the scimitar that was on his waist than with a scalpel or knife razor. Next to Oros was Dagon, the leader of the outlaws. He was wearing black, magical armor and was considered a very rare type of ogre since he was an ogre mage. Since he was a magician, he was a lot smarter than ordinary ogres, but just like Oros, he didn't forget about his race. Instead of using spells to blow up the enemy, Dagon enjoyed beating the enemies with his mace. The two males looked like they would reek of blood, and between them, a slender, beautiful woman was standing crookedly. It was Ophelia, the female owner of the pub. "Hes making us wait," Dagon growled while looking below the gate. Ophelia frowned when she felt the hot wind blow through her hair, and then she swung her tail violently as if to express her discomfort. "Hes the only one that answered our call. And it's not that Hes making us wait, it's just that we're impatient." Agarez would soon attack. Mad Oros and Dagon had a fixed fighting style, but they weren't used to attacks that came from outside of the city. Lack of experience was usually paired up with fear. On top of that, Agarez had already shown many times just how strong and brutal he was. Oros and Dagon were nervous. They were scared, and they couldn't hide their impatient personality. It's because they had gathered on top of the gate way earlier than they had originally planned. Instead of expressing his nervousness like Dagon, Oros kept on smoking. He didn't like this situation. The owner of the House of Mammon was unknown. According to Ophelia's report, he did kill Foras and Yungcheros. They knew that the owner was a lot stronger than them. But they didn't know how much stronger Foras and Junkeros. Oros and Dagon were strong enough to fight against them. If the city's leaders increased from 3 to 4, it would be a very significant thing. But that wasn't enough. Agarez was literally eating the owners in the eastern region, and in order to stop him, they needed more. Oros thought a lot more than Dagon. The owner of the House of Mammon had to be strong, but if he was too strong, then that would be a problem. It was like calling for a tiger to chase away a wolf. He was done with his third cigarette. Oros took out his fourth one, and Dagon had a bigger frown. Ophelia, who was standing between them, was slowly swinging her tail while having her arms crossed. While she was trying to hide her nervousness, she spoke. "Hes coming!" Ophelia pointed far away. Oros and Dagon quickly looked at the place that Ophelia's finger was pointing at. 6 large horses were running towards the free city. In front of the horses, there was a black vehicle that was covered in green smoke, undead. While Oros tilted his head, not understanding, the horses were still running and getting closer and closer to the city. A group of skeletons were sitting on top of the vehicle, but their outer appearance was different from ordinary skeletons. They were wearing black armor and released an unusual energy. They couldn't be compared to the few skeletons that were in the free city. Everyone had their eyes fixed on Nightmare, as it was now taking the lead. The 5 horses that were following behind Nightmare could be considered evil spirits, but one could question whether Nightmare could be called a horse. Nightmare's black hair absorbed the light, and the green smoke that was around its body suppressed the areas near it, and the one that was riding on top of Nightmare. The figure was the same, yet different from the 5 that were behind them. A red cloak was attached on the back of the black armor and was blowing in the wind. The figure was holding a warhammer, and it released a blue lightning bolt. Skull, the skeleton taking the lead, roared. No one would believe that the roar belonged to a skeleton, because the roar was so loud that it even shook the ground. The skeleton didn't stop there. The skeleton swung his warhammer and raised it towards the sky. The concentrated lightning bolt was released into the sky, causing sounds of thunder to fill the sky. They naturally looked up. The 3 rulers, as well as the people that were on top of the gate, looked up as the sky was filled with light and the sound of lightning, and something a lot more intense than lightning was in the sky. A fiery sky tore the original sky apart. The demon world sky was filled with different colors, and this helped confirm the owner's existence. Fire dragon. No. It was too small. But the fire that split the sky was strong enough to remind people of a fire dragon. "Get down!" someone yelled. Within seconds, the red flames were right above the gate, and they turned into green waves of fire that blocked everyone's views. Oros and Dagon took a step back and quickly protected their heads. The fire disappeared. The wave of fire didn't hurt anyone that was on top of the gate. Salami flew through the waves of fire, using its fiery wings, and landed. On top of Salome was a man holding a red lance and a female dark elf with white hair. My name is Chun-Yong-ho, and I'm the owner of the House of Mammon. Yong-ho got everyone's attention, and Oros and Dagon felt suppressed after what they saw, causing them to gulp without noticing. Ophelia looked at Yong-ho, and she scrunched up her face to hold in her laughter. First, I'll say that you displayed a successful show. Ophelia's bar was located at the top floor of the pub. Ophelia was behind the bar, just like the first time they met, and she spoke with a slightly mischievous face. Yong-ho sat between Catalina and Skull and shrugged his shoulders. You think so too, right? Making a good first impression was important. The reason why Oros and Dagon extended their hands out to him was simple. They wanted to use Yong-ho. There was no reason to act unsophisticated in front of them. There was a need to leave a strong impression. Though it wasn't easy. They probably won't fall that easily. Ophelia knew Yong-ho's intentions. That's why she answered seriously. Oros and Dagon aren't naive. They may have been surprised during that moment, but they're just trying to test the waters. Agarez wasn't going to retreat after seeing some fire show in the sky. In order to kill the opponent, they needed to use an actual sharp knife, and not a wedding knife that was used for decorations. It wasn't completely ineffective. The fact that Yong-ho left a strong impression on the two rulers, as well as those that were part of the groups, was important. Yong-ho and Ophelia knew, even if no one mentioned it, so, after exchanging a few glances with each other, they intentionally kept quiet about it. Yong-ho grabbed the glass cup that Ophelia handed and asked, anyways, was it because of that the meeting was pushed back? Yong-ho assumed he would be in a chaotic meeting with the rulers, but that wasn't the case. After Oros and Dagon briefly introduced themselves, they returned to their house and pushed the meeting back. Ophelia, who was officially in charge of taking care of Yong-ho, shrugged. That's not really the reason. They need to have an idea who you are as well. It's my job to help the new owners slightly open up through banquets. Ban. Ket's Yong-ho looked around as he said it. There was nothing here that was related to that. Well, of course, Ophelia was beautiful, but if this was considered a banquet, then it was quite a bland one, and Ophelia probably wasn't referring to this as the banquet. Oh my, so you really want me to prepare one for you? Shall I call the girls? Ophelia asked with a smile on her face, and Yong-ho just waved his hand. Well, it's good that it's just us. We can continue with the work that we've been pushing back. Ophelia's eyes widened when she heard Yong-ho's answer. Work that's been pushed back. Skull laughed as usual, and Catalina stepped back while pouting. Ophelia blinked her eyes again and came to a realization after tilting her head several times. She jumped over the bar happily and stood in front of Yong-ho. Let's start the registration. Yong-ho spoke. Ophelia happily showed her respect. Chapter 84. There were several reasons why Yong-ho pushed Ophelia's registration back, but the main reason was simple. Yong-ho didn't have any reserved power. Registered spirits were very special beings. Ordinary spirits worked through contracts. Based on the type of spirit, the magical binding power may be different, but other than that, it wasn't any different from the contracts that humans used in the human world. Registered spirits had a relationship with the user. Since the soul of both sides were being connected, they were closer than those that were related by blood. When the owner became stronger, the spirit became stronger, and vice versa. That meant that the owner could become stronger just by increasing the number of registered spirits. However, there was a limit to the number of registered spirits that an owner could have. It wasn't because there was a limit to the expected growth rate of the owner as the number of spirits increased. It was because there was a limit to how many spirits the owner was able to control. The total amount of mana, control, and the size of the spirit were all important factors. There were a lot of factors, but in the end, it was more about the owner's reserved power. The stronger the owner's mana and spirit was, the more spirits they were able to register. The reason why ordinary owners limited the number of spirits to 3, sometimes up to 5, was because they had no choice. It was as if Yong-ho's reserved power was divided into 10 boxes. Among them, Eligor took 2, and Catalina and Skull took 3. He had already used up 8 boxes because of those 3 spirits. He had 2 boxes left. But Ophelia demanded 4, so to Yong-ho, she was a spirit that demanded a lot more than he was able to offer. The same reason applied to Armin. Even though Armand suppressed most of his powers for Yong-ho, he was a supreme being. Even if Yong-ho gave up Eligor, Catalina, and Skull's registration, he still wouldn't have enough to register Armand as a spirit. Mammon, the king of greed, was an extremely strong being because he was able to register 12 spirits, and those spirits were on the same level as Aemon. Yong-ho had continuously grown stronger ever since he had become the owner, and thanks to Yong-ho, Catalina, and the other spirits were able to grow just as much. Thanks to the 4 horns that he had obtained, his total amount of mana had increased a lot, but his ability to control hadn't grown as much as his mana. Yong-ho still needed time to train so that he could have complete control over his mana. For a few days, Yong-ho continuously competed in the arena, and just like the time he had consumed the distortion, his maximum mana amount increased. He now had enough reserved power. This isn't the official registration. You'll have to visit the dungeon soon and register with Lucia. Registered spirits belong to the owner, as well as the dungeon. It seemed like she already knew that information, because she continued to urge Yong-ho with her eyes. Ophelia wanted to get stronger. It wasn't because she grew up watching her father long for power while working as the pub owner. Ophelia had seen many spirits. The law of the jungle was the governing principle of the demon world. The strength of one's mana even decided their lifespan and age in this world. Everyone desired growth. Everyone desired greater and stronger mana. But there were limitations. There were those that overcame those limits through constant training, but it was rare. The process was long and tough. There were a lot more that gave up because they weren't able to overcome their limitations despite working really hard. Ophelia was the same. Even though she was carrying out her father's teachings and improving her skills, her mana level had remained the same for a while. That was why she was so desperate. Ophelia suppressed her anxiety and closed her eyes. She kneeled in front of Yong-ho. Yong-ho did the same and placed his hands on Ophelia's shoulders. He leaned in slowly and placed his forehead on hers. The mark of the spirit, that was already engraved on her forehead, started to shine. It's done. Yong-ho spoke a minute or two after he had placed his forehead on Ophelia's. Yong-ho released a deep sigh and stood up. Ophelia had a blank expression and just blinked. That's it was that really it. Her expression displayed her true feelings, and Yong-ho displayed a slightly embarrassed smile. He did as Lucia instructed him, but did it fail? However, they were both being too hasty. Both Yong-ho and Ophelia's spirit felt a shock. Catalina and Skull, who were watching, however, didn't really feel anything. Yong-ho roared. All 4 of his horns were completely exposed, and the mana that was hidden was suddenly released. Ophelia trembled, and she let out a cry that sounded like a scream. Her small horns were exposed as well. In between the 2 horns that were on her forehead, a 3rd horn came out. Ophelia originally had 3 horns, but there was a stronger power that prevented her horn from growing out. Now that she was Yong-ho's spirit, she felt pleasure in her growth. It was a feeling that she had forgotten and had been desperately wanting to experience again for a long time. Now that Ophelia was his, Yong-ho became stronger, and both Catalina and Skull were affected by it too. It wasn't as much as Yong-ho and Ophelia, but they both felt a growth within themselves. A strong mana shook the bar. The mana belonged to the owner and his spirits, and even though the colors and the elements were different, the mana looked beautiful. Yong-ho looked down at Ophelia as he breathed heavily. Ophelia, who was also crying out while having her arms wrapped around herself, looked up at Yong-ho. They felt a bond that was different from before. Just like how Yong-ho was able to communicate with Catalina with just his eyes, Yong-ho and Ophelia were able to feel each other's thoughts and feelings. This place is soundproof, right? Ophelia smiled brightly despite being exhausted. Yong-ho extended his hand towards her. They communicated using their voices. Congratulations on being the House of Mammon Spirit. You're under a slave contract now, and won't be able to get out of it. Make sure you're prepared for it. Will it be any different from before? Ophelia replied as she grabbed Yong-ho's hand, with both the owner and spirit exchanging satisfied smiles. Half a day had passed since Yong-ho arrived, and night had now fallen. The 3 rulers were gathered in a secret room that was located under the central plaza. Just like their ordinary meetings, they sat around the round table with no one behind them. The rule of this meeting was that only the rulers could stay in the room. So, did it have any effect? Dargon's question sounded urgent, but Ophelia just shrugged her shoulders. It had no effect. He must have banquets every day. I even called in a few girls, but he didn't budge. You saw the guard that follows him around, right? I haven't checked all of them, but I'm sure his registered spirits are all beautiful women. The smile she displayed after finishing her sentence was odd, but they didn't notice. Oros mumbled to himself. Is he a lady killer? It wasn't bad. Right now, the Free City's rulers needed a warrior to fight along with them, not a master they were going to start serving. Being a lady killer was just a personality trait, not a flaw. Even if he was used to women like Ophelia had mentioned, it meant that he liked women and they would be able to use that to their advantage. The most important thing is how powerful the owner of the House of Mammon is. If he's the same as for us, then things will become complicated for us. When Oros spoke, Dargon nodded his head. Ophelia placed her right hand on her chin and replied, but the House of Mammon was the only one that answered to our call. Right. Having another ally means a lot for us, don't you think? Even if we exclude the House of Mammon's spirits. Our enemy is Agares. It won't be easy. All three of us will have to fight. We'll have to use all of our powers. Since we're going to fight against a strong opponent, it's important for us to know how powerful the House of Mammon's owner is. Oros made a reasonable argument. Before Ophelia could reply, Dargon spoke. Should I try fighting him? It sounded like he didn't want to figure things out. Oros frowned. And if you lose, If it ends in a draw, or you lose, fighting against Agares is a different issue. So the real issue is when you lose to the owner of the House of Mammon. Are you going to give up your power after the fight? The reason why these three became the leaders of the Free City was simple. It was because they were the most powerful figures within their groups. A ruler couldn't act on their own. If they were to lose to the House of Mammon's owner in front of everyone, the consequences would be severe. And Dargon was known to have the best military force. The days of washing blood away with blood were gone. The three rulers had balanced their power, and through that, they were able to maintain peace for about 10 years, so now they had an odd brotherly love for each other. Dargon was able to figure out fighting strategies, and since Oros had a good relationship with him, it wouldn't do him any good if Dargon was overthrown. Should I send my right-hand man Jacoby, or ask to spar in secret? If he was an idiot, I'm sure he'll agree without any hesitation. Oros let out a sigh because Dargon was being pathetic, and then he looked over at Ophelia. Ophelia waved her hands. I've met him several times and even drank with him, so I can tell you that he's not an idiot. If you want to test out his power, then I'm sure he'll ask the same thing from us. Let's not be hasty. The House of Mammon's owner may lose as well. On top of that, he came to the Free City to help. It was best to avoid unnecessary conflict. But there is a need to test him though. I agree with Dargon on that. Oros spoke again, and Dargon nodded his head. Ophelia shrugged her shoulders again. Well, we still have time. Let's think carefully. The official meeting was tomorrow, and they didn't have anything else to talk about. Like always, Ophelia was the first one to leave, even though they hadn't officially ended the meeting. Ophelia lightly waved her hand, and Dargon asked a question while looking at her back. Ophelia, what? When she answered without looking back, Dargon didn't say anything. He spoke as if he was suspicious of her. Something has changed. Is it your aura? Dargon easily controlled the outlaws that were in the Free City. Even though he was simple-minded, he wasn't dumb. When it came to his fighting senses, he was a lot stronger than Oros. Ophelia calmly replied, Oh, it's that day. Dargon closed his mouth, and Oros frowned. Ophelia calmed her surprised heart and continued walking. She exited while swinging her tail. The official meeting took place during lunchtime. Yong-ho arrived at the secret room with Catalina and Skull and saw Dargon, who was prepared to fight him. The round table was located behind Dargon, and both Oros and Ophelia were sitting in front of it. Oros had a frown on his face, and Ophelia looked at Yong-ho, indicating that she didn't have a choice. The meeting room was made out of stone, and since the building was also used as an arena, it was quite big. Dargon spoke while holding up his mace. I'm pretty simple-minded. It can't be helped because I'm curious about your skills. Let's spar. Dargon wasn't dumb. He wasn't going to put his life on the line. That's why he even displayed a friendly smile. Skull glared at Dargon and tightened his grip on his hammer, and Catalina released her black mana. They both glared angrily at Ophelia, and Oros Yong-ho sighed. Based on the conversation he had with Ophelia, he expected this to happen, but he didn't think it would happen like this. Anyways, one of their assumptions was correct. Instead of being surprised, Yong-ho spoke to both Dargon and Oros Ilstat. There was really no reason to fight. Yong-ho took a step forward. The mana that he had hidden while within the free city was released, as it showed how strong he really was. Chapter 85. Yong-ho's mana erupted like an explosion. An unexpected rainstorm. The horns above Yong-ho's ears had initially been hidden, but now they were growing. They grew straight out and created a sharp, triangular shape above his head, comparable to the blade of a knife. The concentrated mana didn't disappear. Instead, it started to violently spin around Yong-ho and cover the entirety of the meeting room. Oros gulped. Yong-ho now had 2 horns on each side, meaning he now had a total of 4. Oros knew that Yong-ho was strong, but he never knew that Yong-ho even had 4 horns. The number of horns represented the user's mana class. The owners in the empty region of the demon world usually had 2 to 3 horns, while out of all the owners in the entire demon world, owners with 4 horns make up less than half. Horns do not determine everything. Oros screamed it in his head. He controlled his mind so that he wouldn't be swept away by the mana. It was true. The number of horns was a sign of how strong one's mana was, but it didn't determine everything. There have been owners with just 3 horns that have had much more powerful mana than some owners with 4. Having the same number of horns didn't mean that the strength of mana was the same. There was usually a definite difference in strength between users. It only took Oros a short time to recover. While he was catching his breath, he felt relieved by that thought. He had managed to succeed in looking at Yong-ho without panicking. Horns didn't determine everything, mana didn't determine everything. Either the strength of mana wasn't enough to determine one's power. It's true that the stronger one's mana was, the greater the advantage they had during a fight, but there was no guarantee, for instance, that an opponent holding a sword was a skilled swordsman. Furthermore, an ogre or a troll could use their physical strength to overpower the strength of an opponent's mana. Mana alone wasn't enough to determine the result of the battle, but Oros still felt himself cower. Cold sweat was rolling down his back. He still had a hard time breathing. It seemed like the mana that Yong-ho released was pushing Oros really violently. Simply saying that his mana was strong wasn't enough to describe it. It was heavy. It couldn't be compared to the mana of Foras or Yungsheros. Oros gritted his teeth. He activated his physical skill and tried to escape the suppression he was feeling from Yong-ho's mana. It's not strong. It was strong. It was definitely strong. But it wasn't absolute. His mana was about 1/5 times stronger than the mana that Yungsheros and Foras had. However, he was sure that the mana that Agares possessed was a lot stronger. He just couldn't get rid of the oppression that he was feeling. It wasn't just because of the size of the mana. There was something else. There was something within Yong-ho's mana, and it was something that Oros wasn't able to detect. It had only been 10 seconds since Yong-ho released his mana. Oros had no choice but to acknowledge Yong-ho's power. He gave up on resisting it. That's why during those past 10 seconds, he had completely forgotten about Dargon's existence. Oros felt like he was being blown away by the mana rainstorm, whereas Dargon was face to face with the root of the rainstorm. The oppression that he was feeling couldn't be compared to what Oros was feeling. Dargon used his mana to resist as well. As an ogre mage, he was able to control a larger amount of mana than Oros. Dargon smiled. He put his mace down and spoke loudly. "You're strong. Therese, no need to fight. No, I acknowledge you, owner of the House of Mammon." He didn't sound good. It was obvious that he was forcing himself to say it. Oros could imagine the expression that Dargon had as he looked at his back. It felt like he could see Dargon forcing a smile. Yong-ho looked straight at Dargon and then burst out laughing. One who wields the sword must know that they can get hit by the sword as well. He raised his right arm. The mana that was flowing violently around him suddenly calmed down. But he couldn't put his guard down yet, for this was just the calm before the storm. Yong-ho focused his mana in one place. Amon's fire then rose out of Yong-ho's right hand and transformed into a lance. "Even though you started it, it'll be the one ending it. I also need to test your strength." The flowing mana transformed into fire. The oppression they felt was now a lot stronger than before. Mana wasn't the only thing, there was something else within it. Oros didn't know what, but he definitely felt something special. It was the worst situation. Dargon couldn't avoid the fight anymore. Like Ophelia had stated, the owner of the House of Mammon wasn't a fool. There was a good chance that it wasn't going to end with a simple spar, and that the result of this fight would end up breaking the equality between them. Dargon breathed heavily. He started spitting out profanities and tightened his grip on his mace. Oros contemplated. The moment felt like an eternity. What was he supposed to do? Should he join Dargon? Should he fight together with Dargon so that they could prevent Yong-ho from dominating over them? But that was unreasonable. This may ruin their relationship with the House of Mammon's owner. It was a fight Dargon shouldn't have started. What was he supposed to do? Was he going to acknowledge the fact that he couldn't take responsibility for Dargon's mistake? Was he going to let Yong-ho take the lead? Should he try convincing Yong-ho that fighting amongst themselves was useless and that they should focus on taking down Agarez? It was a close call. Oros was focusing on Yong-ho and Dargon when an unexpected thing happened. The owner of the great House of Mammon, I ask that you calm your anger. Please forgive Dargon's mistake and blame me for not being able to talk him out of it. The calm voice belonged to Ophelia. Oros widened his eyes when he saw who the voice belonged to. Ophelia was known for being full of pride, but currently she was kneeling on the ground. Ophelia. Oros has known Ophelia for 10 years. No matter what kind of owner she saw, she spoke formally to them. But that's all she did. He never imagined that she would do something like this. Oros felt like his head was going to explode. Ophelia's actions had completely caught him off guard, but the situation he was in was making him feel extremely confused. He was on the same level as Ophelia and Dargon, but Ophelia kneeled on the ground and acknowledged that she was beneath the House of Mammon's owner. That meant that the other leaders were under Yong-ho as well. It might be better for Dargon because it would have been embarrassing if he lost to Yong-ho, but in actuality, this was a perfect win for Yong-ho. I also asked for your forgiveness. No, please forgive me. Please forgive me for testing you, Dargon spoke. As the leader of the outlaws, he was the most sensitive out of all the other leaders when it came to superiority. The House of Mammon's owner was stronger than himself. He had no choice but to acknowledge and back away. Going up against a stronger opponent was foolish, not courageous, and this situation was the perfect example of that. Dargon thought he was immature for even requesting the fight. Since Ophelia was acting that way, there was no need for him to push it. Bowing was his only viable solution. Once Ophelia and Dargon acknowledged their defeat, Yong-ho looked at Oros. Oros closed his eyes, shut. Just like Ophelia and Dargon, he showed respect towards Yong-ho. He acknowledged defeat. I ask for your forgiveness. He didn't say much, but it was enough. Yong-ho slowly nodded his head while maintaining a sharp, cold expression. The fiery mana disappeared. Ophelia looked at Yong-ho and sent signals with her eyes. That was too much. Didn't it make you cringe? How could you say that you were going to end the fight? The level of communication was weaker than Catalina, but Yong-ho understood the basics. In order to hide the smile that appeared on his face, he purposely swung his right arm more violently. He spoke with his eyes. And you're okay with kneeling? It's not my first time you're my owner anyway. It's a relief that things worked out. This was what he had been expecting. Ophelia knew Oros and Dargon's personality, and depending on the situation, she knew how they were going to react. But Ophelia was actually surprised by Yong-ho's strength. It had only been a month since she first saw Yong-ho, but he had grown a lot since then. He grew at an extremely fast rate. Yong-ho played a big role in making today's plan successful. If Yong-ho's mana hadn't been this strong, and if he wasn't strong enough to contain Aemon's power inside his own mana, then today's plan with the V definitely failed. We're going to get caught. Stop smiling, I can't help it. This was the greatest investment of my life. It was a forced investment though. While the owner and his spirit were talking happily, Dargon and Oros accepted their reality while displaying mixed emotions. The House of Mammon's owner was far more than just an ordinary warrior. Skull put the hammer down, and Catalina looked at Yong-ho with affection and respect. Even though her tail and ears were flapping violently, Dagon and Oros were so focused on Yong-ho that they didn't even realize the guard's feelings. Yong-ho walked towards the table. The table no longer represented equality. The moment Yong-ho took his seat, he was now at the head of the table. I will now provide an explanation about Agares. Ophelia was in charge of the meeting. She stood in front of a portable blackboard that held various data on it and pointed to the map of the southern empty region. Agares is currently located in the House of Ales dungeon, which is located to the east of the Free City. According to the scout team, it seems like Agares isn't even trying to hide. The soldiers that Agares has gathered from the other dungeons are currently gathering there. Agares ate the owner of the House of Ale, as well as the members of the dungeon. Oros knew about Agares, but he couldn't help but frown. It looked like he really wanted to smoke. Currently, we believe that Agares has about 700 to 100 soldiers. Foras and Yongcheros had about 100-200 soldiers. So when comparing to that, Agares really had a lot of soldiers. Ophelia then explained about the three powers in the Free City. The number was correct, so Dagon and Oros gulped once again. It couldn't be helped. They felt like they were sitting there naked in front of Yong-ho. From the pub, about 70 of them were able to fight. Here is the corrected and properly formatted paragraph. The Workers' Guild and the Outlaw Group had about 100 soldiers each, so the pub had the least when looking at just the numbers, but the soldiers that Ophelia picked were just as strong as the other two groups. This is a life and death situation for the Free City, so I'm sure we'll be able to gather more soldiers. Since we also have a fortress, we shouldn't have that big of a disadvantage. The bigger the group was, the stronger it would become. This was common sense during war, and it also worked that way in the demon world. However, it wasn't completely identical to the human world. Magic was also used in the demon world. If one has extremely strong mana, they were able to replace tens, maybe hundreds of soldiers. In the demon world, one soldier had the ability to change the entire flow of war. The result of this war depended on Agares' existence. The reason why the Free City's leaders asked for Yong-ho's help was because they needed someone to fight Agares with them. Ophelia continued her explanation. It was regarding Agares' army and his powers that were somewhat known in the demon world. 1 week after the meeting, Agares' army left the House of Ale's dungeon. Chapter 86. Dry wind was blowing from the east. Agares wasn't trying to hide his movements, and everyone in the Free City realized that an army was approaching with the easterly wind. There were those that ran away from the city. However, some acted like their usual selves, while others were showing willingness to fight. It took 2 days. The time that Agares' army took walking through the desert was like an invisible hand choking the Free City's neck. They're almost here. Oros was on top of the gate and looked into the distance while putting a cigarette in his mouth. Even though it was his 6th one, no one stopped him. Agares' army was made up of about 10 sound spirits, while the Free City's defensive forces only had about 500, so Agares had almost twice as many as them. Oros rolled his eyes. It wasn't easy to look away from the army that was approaching to kill them, but he looked at each and every one of their soldiers that were stationed on top of the gate. He also saw Dagon's large frame at the end of the eastern gate. The outlaws that were in his group were standing around in an unorganized manner. He was far away, so he couldn't tell, but Dagon was nervous. Even though he fought in many battles, it seemed like war was an unfamiliar thing to him. Ophelia looked down at Agares' army with a cold expression while having her arms crossed. Even though she looked calm, her tail revealed that she was worried and anxious. Her slightly slouched position revealed her true feelings. All 3 leaders of the Free City were on top of the gate, but the House of Mammon's owner wasn't there. He wasn't even in the Free City 2 days ago. The moment Ophelia picked up Agares' movement, Yong-ho left the city. He wasn't running away. They desperately hoped he wasn't. And he did say one thing before leaving. When the war starts, I'm going to cause chaos at their base. Keep defending, and once things become chaotic, open fire. They asked how he was going to do it, but Yong-ho didn't answer. They also asked how they would know when to open fire, and all he told them was that they would know once they saw it. Oros gritted his teeth. The House of Mammon's guard and the skeleton knight were standing right next to Ophelia, which helped calm Oros down. The House of Mammon's owner was the only one that left. According to Ophelia, The dark elf guard was the owner's lover. If he planned on running away, then he wouldn't have left his lover in the free city. Agarest soldiers stopped in front of the various weapons that were installed outside of the gate. It seemed like he was giving them a break before ordering them to attack. There were a variety of different spirits. While devouring the owners in the eastern region, he scouted their spirits, so there were many different types. There were goblins, orcs, ogres, and even trolls. Next to the group that looked like lycanthropes, there were insect-type spirits in various sizes, and next to them, there were siege weapons and golems. They were pressured by the fact that there were around 1,000 sound of them. Oros took a deep breath. He heard Dagon's voice through the close-range communication device that was in his ear. No news from the House of Mammon's owner, do you? Do you think maybe he ran away, Therese? No way, Hez. Not the type to do that. Hez definitely going to come. You saw his eyes, too. He's not the type to run away. Hez definitely going to fight with us, Oros answered right away. He said that to reassure both Dagon and himself. They came this far, so they had no choice but to believe in him. Ophelia didn't say anything. That's why Oros was feeling more anxious. He tried recalling the look that Yong-ho had. The Yong-ho that he saw in the meeting room wasn't the type to run away. If he was going to run away, he wouldn't have answered to their request in the first place. More time passed. The wind that was blowing stopped, and Agarest troops started advancing again. No, it was more like they charged. Screams and roars filled the desert. The sounds could even be considered weapons. The warriors in the free city started trembling in fear when the screams and roars hit their walls. Prepare for battle. Prepare for battle. They couldn't wait any longer. They had to fight now. Oros spat out the cigarette that was in his mouth and then screamed. Dagon also tightened his grip on his mace and prepared to command the warriors. The warriors were standing in front of the weapons and were waiting for him to signal them. The ground started shaking. Agarest troops were getting closer. Oros waved his hand and ordered them to attack. The orcs' roars hit the walls, and the various weapons flew over Agarest troops. Oros erased the thought of Yong-ho from his head. The spirits that were charging rushed through the incoming artillery fire. The arrows that both sides released covered the sky, and rocks and spells were flying through the air. More sounds filled their surroundings. Roars, cries, and screams were coming from all over the place. But because of that, they were able to hear better. A small whisper ripped through the cries and entered Oros' ear. Coming, Ophelia wasn't looking at Agarest troops. Catalina, the dark elf guard that was standing next to her, turned around towards the southern region with a bright smile. The siege weapon hit the walls, but Oros didn't care. He followed Ophelia and Catalina and turned around. There was a loud sound behind them. Skull. There was a fiery path in the distance, and it split the sky. Oros had seen it before, so he knew it was Yong-ho. Oros was sure that he had returned. Yong-ho wasn't the only one that returned. The ground was shaking. The spirits near realized it. It wasn't because Agarest troops were charging, and it also wasn't because their weapons were hitting the walls and ground. Oros knew what this shaking was. He experienced it several times while living in the southern region. That's why he almost couldn't believe it. He almost doubted it. Before he could say it, the thing that he was imagining appeared in front of him. It was a large landworm on top of that. There were 3 of them. Landworm. Is he really controlling a landworm? Dagon was shocked. Oros shook his head. He realized what was happening after seeing the landworm and fire moving faster than Agarest troops. Hares being chased. Hares being chased. He's brought the landworms here. The landworm's roar was louder than Oros' scream. Agarest troops stopped moving during that moment. Both sides were attacking each other non-stop, but now both sides had stopped at the same time. Everyone looked at one area, and Yong-ho gave his order while everyone was looking at him. Salami flapped his fiery wings once more. Attack! He soared into the air. The fire provoked the landworms, and Salami started descending while feeling thrilled and excited. Salami descended as low as possible. Yong-ho focused. He gathered the mana that was contained in the bracelet on his left arm. It was the reward he earned from clearing the 3rd floor. It was the same bracelet that Kaiwan had, and mana was contained within it. 2 days. That's how long it took Yong-ho to find the landworms, and he was even able to gather 3 of them. He was extremely lucky with the timing Salami charged through Agarest troops. His troops couldn't even touch the fire because it was charging at an extremely fast rate. The moment Salami descended to the lowest point, Yong-ho released all the mana that was inside the bracelet. The mana exploded. While the gray-colored mana was moving violently, Yong-ho grabbed the handle that was on Salami's back. He ordered Salami again. Fly. Salami's fiery wings were flapping in the air. Salami felt like his body was going to break, so he used gravity to help him fly. He soared vertically. Salami was able to fly faster thanks to the wind and the fire that flew all over the place. It's only been a few seconds since he released his mana. A black shadow appeared above Agares' troops' heads. The shadow covered the skies, and they believed that it was a disaster they couldn't escape. The landworms were no longer chasing Yong-ho. They instead started to attack Agares' troops as if they were drunk by the mana that was floating in the air. The ground started shaking, and screams and cries filled the air. The result of the smaller landworms' movements was terrible. The roars were louder than the screams. Bones and flesh had been crushed, and within moments, many spirits had lost their lives. What made it worse was that the landworms weren't planning on stopping. This was just the start of the disaster. The ones that were on top of the gate were at a loss for words. Oros looked shocked. What happened? How did Yong-ho bring those landworms here? Do they just watch? No. Even though the landworms were large and strong, they couldn't kill 100 spirits. Even though Agares' troops were in a chaotic state, they weren't just going to be killed by the landworms. Yong-ho only gave one order. And there were those on top of the gate that didn't forget. Attack, attack, with everything you got, Ophelia ordered. The Free City's warriors felt overwhelmed, but they soon came to a realization. This was the time for them to attack. The landworms and the Free City weren't allies. There was no need for them to distinguish between allies and foes. Shoot! Shoot! They attacked both the landworms and Agares' troops. And then there was another order. Skull. The gates opened. A black vehicle left the Free City like an arrow that had been shot behind them. Monsters that were carrying the skeletons charged forward. Ophelia's elite troops also followed behind. Skull went around the battlefield. The landworms were rampaging in the middle of Agares' troops. The area was big, and soldiers were standing around where the landworms were. Even though they didn't die from the landworms' attacks, they were still in a chaotic state. Skull and the elite soldiers were charging towards them. Thunder was released from Skull's hammer, and the skeletons and elite soldiers attacked Agares' troops with their lances. It almost looked like a very strong black wind. Fire appeared in the sky. Yong-ho rolled his eyes after watching the fight while riding on Salami. He saw Catalina releasing black mana from the top of the gate. Even though she was far away, he assumed she felt him watching. He thought he had even heard her voice. Yong-ho smiled. He raised his right arm and grabbed the lance that was created from the fire. He wasn't just going to watch. This war was Yong-ho's. Salami roared and flew down again. The left side of the battle, Skull and the elite soldiers were fighting on that side. So Yong-ho and Salami also headed in that direction. Yong-ho's lance then transformed into a fiery one. Chapter 87. The landworms were jumping around everywhere. Even though the brown-colored mana wasn't specifically targeted at someone, it was useless. The moment the landworms entered, many spirits died, and the spirits that survived instinctively started to attack them. Since both sides were fighting to live, it was extremely violent. It was a mess. Piles of corpses were either flying in the air or being buried in the ground. Every time the landworm's body hit the ground, the earth shook violently. The spirit's screams filled the air. The siege weapons were now targeted towards the landworms instead of the walls, but aiming was meaningless because they couldn't tell the difference between the two. On top of that, the Free City was attacking as well. Arrows filled the air, and the spirits that were fighting the landworms had no choice but to die. 1,000 spirits wasn't a small number. However, it didn't mean that they were able to look after each other on the battlefield. The chaos that began in the center spread out to other parts of the battlefield like wildfire. Skull and the soldiers that followed him passed through the left side of the battlefield. Agares' troops were made up of different types of spirits, and they were separated based on that. Skull's decision to go left wasn't on impulse. The group before them was made up of goblins, imps, and orcs, and the soldiers that were with Skull just didn't have the ability to fight them. A head exploded. Skull used his warhammer to cast a thunder spell and destroyed an orc's head. Skull then tightened his grip on his hammer, and instead of aiming for the next target, he commanded Nightmare to continue running. The soldiers that stopped couldn't do their jobs. On top of that, evading large monsters such as the golems, ogres, and trolls was a lot better compared to fighting them. Skull's warhammer helped fight against the enemy, as well as clear the path for the soldiers following him. Even though there were only a dozen soldiers, it was enough. One group that didn't stop fighting fought against a group of enemy spirits that also had about a dozen in the group. Skull and Nightmare rushed through the group and were now outside of the battlefield. Skull's hammer was covered in blood and brain, and as Skull loosened his grip, he looked out into the distance. An extravagant and flashy fire filled the sky. Skull! Skull screamed again. Fire exploded on the right side of the battlefield, as if it was responding to Skull's scream, Roar! Fire enveloped both Salami and Yong-ho as they turned into a javelin. They flew towards the ground where the shock and fire of their attack destroyed Agares' troops. Thanks to that, the battlefield became even more chaotic. Salami didn't stop. The moment Yong-ho swung Arman and created a wave of fire, Salami flapped its wings again and flew while looking straight ahead. The golem's fist targeted Salami. The extremely large golem was created to block off its enemies, and its fist was big enough to destroy both Salami and Yong-ho with a single swing. The single punch distorted the air. Salami barely missed the golem's fist and flew up while riding the golem's arm. Instead of targeting the golem's head, Yong-ho stretched Aemon out towards the other side of the ground and burned the ground by releasing his mana. The soldiers that stopped couldn't do their jobs. On top of that, evading large monsters such as the golems, ogres, and trolls was a lot better compared to fighting them. Skull's warhammer helped fight against the enemy, as well as clear the path for the soldiers following him. Even though there were only a dozen soldiers, it was enough. One group that didn't stop fighting fought against a group of enemy spirits that also had about a dozen in the group. Skull and Nightmare rushed through the group and were now outside of the battlefield. Skull's hammer was covered in blood and brain, and as Skull loosened his grip, he looked out into the distance. An extravagant and flashy fire filled the sky. Skull! Skull screamed again. Fire exploded on the right side of the battlefield, as if it was responding to Skull's scream, Roar! Fire enveloped both Salami and Yong-ho as they turned into a javelin. They flew towards the ground where the shock and fire of their attack destroyed Agares' troops. Thanks to that, the battlefield became even more chaotic. Salami didn't stop. The moment Yong-ho swung Aemon and created a wave of fire, Salami flapped its wings again and flew while looking straight ahead. The golem's fist targeted Salami. The extremely large golem was created to block off its enemies, and its fist was big enough to destroy both Salami and Yong-ho with a single swing. The single punch distorted the air. Salami barely missed the golem's fist and flew up while riding the golem's arm. Instead of targeting the golem's head, Yong-ho stretched Aemon out towards the other side of the ground and burned the ground by releasing his manakyaha. A grotesque scream filled Yong-ho's ears. Half of Agares' troops were insect-type monsters, and they were weak against fire. Yong-ho was releasing fire in various different areas, and they didn't have the strength to go up against him. They would either fire sharp bullets or acid from a distance. Salami flew higher. Yong-ho took a deep breath and looked out into the distance. The landworms were still jumping up and down. Agares' troops looked like they weren't going to stand by and watch, because a golem, large insect-type monsters, and mages were put into the battlefield. However, arrows that were shot from the free city kept raining down on their heads. The plan was a huge success. 1,000 wasn't a small number, but if they kept doing this for a few more minutes, then that 1,000 would eventually break apart. They're going to fall apart. That was what Yong-ho was expecting, and he started seeing it. Agares' troops were in a chaotic state. While Agares was gaining the dungeons that belonged to other owners, the spirits that were under his control couldn't really be considered his, just a little more. A little more until they're completely defeated. Boom! The loud explosion came from the edge of the battlefield. There were many different sounds within the battlefield, but this one was distinct. Yong-ho instinctively turned his attention towards the sound, and he witnessed a whirlpool of mana that he's never seen before. It was a monster. The monster had 6 eyes, a huge jaw, and a grey scale covering its head. There were bumps and horns on its long body, and it had 6 legs, making the monster look like a spider. The monster also had a large tail with sharp thorns on the end. It had a lot of arms too. Out of those arms, 2 of them that stretched out towards the sky caught Yongho's attention. Those 2 arms were larger than the others, and at the end of those arms there were large blades that were about 2 meters long. The monster released a large amount of mana and kicked off the ground. It started to approach the center of the battlefield. The arrows that filled the sky and the landworms that were jumping around weren't enough to stop it. One of the landworms saw the monster, and the monster also saw that landworm. The monster didn't stop and started swinging the blades that were attached to its arms. The blades broke the landworm's hard shell. Then the monster cut off part of the landworm's head. It destroyed the landworm and poured acid onto the landworm's destroyed head. The monster slashed it apart. Despite the fact that the landworm was quite big, the monster used its blades to quickly cut the body. The monster ripped it apart and used its teeth that were attached to its huge jaw to bite into it. The landworm's blood and screams summed up what was happening. After ripping the landworm apart, the monster opened its mouth wide. It released a roar that shook the battleground. Kia ha 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 ha! Silence came after the roar. Everyone on the battlefield looked at the monster. It seemed like time had stopped. The monster looked around. Out of the 6 eyes, 2 of them looked towards the sky. There was a purple light. Yongho saw it and had a hunch, and then he realized that was the Demon King, Agares, the one that came from the east to take over the south. He roared again. He broke the time that had stopped. More arms appeared on Agares' back. They were wings that were covered in film. Out of the 6 eyes, 2 of them were still looking at Yongho, but the remaining 4 weren't looking somewhere else. The remaining 2 landworms roared and charged towards Agares, but it wasn't the roar of a predator. It was more like a desperation of trying to resist him. Agares kicked off the ground. The landworms were 3 times bigger than him, but he was able to take them down. After cutting the landworms' bodies using his blades, he spread out his wings. The landworms weren't dead yet. They still had the ability to fight. But Agares didn't waste his time on killing them. All 6 of his eyes were on the free city's walls. Fire. This is a lengthy and action-packed paragraph, and it's full of excellent imagery. I've corrected all the spelling, spacing, and line break errors to ensure it reads well for your audiobook. Here is the corrected script. Someone from the top of the wall yelled. That command was their signal to fire, but at the same time it was also the beginning of fear. Soldiers on top of the gate were scared. The arrows and cannonballs weren't hitting. Agares spread out his wings again. After kicking off the ground, he flapped once and soared into the air. He charged towards the walls. Agares wasn't an ordinary monster. He was a demon king and had already destroyed several dungeons. He was going to destroy the walls and stop them from attacking him. His troops were about to fall, and in order to make time for them, he focused his attention on the free city's walls. There was also another reason. Agares wanted to win. He wanted to put fear into them, and after killing the leaders that were commanding them, he was going to destroy the free city's troops. His assumption was right. Just charging towards them was enough to instill fear into them. The battlefield was now under his control. Kia ha ha ha! He roared. The predator's rage was strangling the necks of the prey. The acid that was pouring out of Agares' mouth covered the sky. Boom! There was a loud explosion. A part of the wall fell apart when Agares slammed his body against it, and the soldiers near it shared the same fate as the spirits that were killed by the landworms. The acid that covered the sky landed on the soldiers that were on top of the wall, causing them to experience an agonizing death. Agares' eyes were all looking in different directions. A happy laugh escaped Agares' mouth when he saw soldiers charging towards him. Oros took out the potion he had made earlier and injected it into his body. The potion made his large body even larger as he charged towards Agares. Even though he kept on swearing, he didn't stop. Dagon was also casting a spell. He strengthened his body and grabbed his mace. The fighting spirit within him was talking. That monster is stronger than you. He's a lot stronger than you are. But he's not someone you can avoid. The leaders were the only ones that could go up against him. and if they don't do anything, he would kill everyone. Ophelia made her decision. This wasn't the time to hide her strength. All three of her horns were now showing, and she released all the power she had obtained by becoming Yongho's spirit. Agares didn't wait for them. He broke the wall and charged. His first target was Oros. Oros swung his scimitar, but it didn't reach Agares. Agares was about 4 meters tall and was known to be extremely violent. His 2 blades attacked Oros and caused him to fly in the air. Oros tightened his grip on his scimitar. One of the blades had cut open at least half of his chest. Even in that moment, Agares' eyes didn't stop moving. All of his eyes were moving in different directions and were watching everything that was happening. Agares spread his wings when he saw Dagon and Ophelia attacking from behind. He violently bit into Oros' body. He jumped into the air and spat Oros towards Dagon and Ophelia. Dagon stopped. Ophelia dodged Oros by kicking off the ground. Agares saw her. He flapped his wings to fly higher and then released acid towards the ground. His 6 eyes were moving once again. He saw that his troops were starting to kill the landworms and the free city that was now completely filled with fear. He also saw Dagon casting a healing spell on Oros, while Ophelia was glaring at him with hatred. He also noticed the soldiers of the free city crying out in pain because of his acid, and his last eye noticed something else. It was a dark elf that had black magic wrapped around her. She was standing on top of the gate with a dagger in her hand and was looking up towards the sky. Agares had a hunch. He quickly moved his eyes and was trying to find the one that was supposed to be on this battlefield. Despite the fact that he focused all of his attention on the battlefield, he didn't appear. The dark elf moved. Agares noticed something with his senses, not his eyes. He quickly turned around and looked up. The fiery lance was charging. It was coming straight down from the sky, and he could feel a large amount of mana accompany it. Agares moved his body. While flapping his wings, he swung his blades. He also released some of his acid. Yongho saw all of it. While Agares was charging towards the walls, instead of chasing after him, he flew up high just for this very moment. Salami released fire and burned the acid. Yongho didn't wait and threw himself towards Agares' blades. Yongho focused. He saw the flow of mana. It was a very clear indicator. Agares' blades cut the air. Salami and Agares were very close to each other. All 6 of his eyes were on Yongho, and Yongho used Iamon to attack while looking at his eyes. He released the lump of mana that he had condensed. The green mana attacked Agares' back. The heat melted his thick shell. There was some distance between Salami and Agares. Instead of looking back at Agares, Yongho commanded Salami. Salami charged towards the gate. Catalina. He yelled. Catalina jumped off the gate. Ophelia followed behind her. The 2 spirits jumped into the air and got on top of the flying Salami. Salami rotated in the air. Salami's back felt heavier, and because it was flying around so much, it also felt tired. However, Salami endured it. After Agares fell from Yongho's mana, Salami charged straight towards him. Agares saw Salami. He endured the pain and spread his wings. Instead of falling, he flew, and instead of running away, he charged towards Yongho and Salami. He didn't clash into them this time. Either Salami and Agares missed each other, but it was different from before. The green fire grew bigger. The fire blocked the sight of all 6 of his eyes. Yongho didn't charge at him. He focused on Salami and Agares' mana. He commanded while dodging the blades. Catalina and Ophelia leaped. The 2 spirits jumped in different directions and got on Agares' back. They listened to Yongho's command and became his sword. Catalina used her dagger that was enveloped in dark mana, and Ophelia used her weapon to cut off Agares' wings. Agares' back was already weak because of Yongho's fire, and his wings weren't strong enough to endure their attacks. His wings eventually broke. Agares released a painful scream. Catalina and Ophelia jumped off Agares' back and threw themselves towards Salami and Yongho. The fire died down. Salami could no longer fly and headed towards the ground. Yongho looked back while holding Catalina and Ophelia. The wingless Agares smashed himself to the ground while screaming, but this wasn't the end. Agares roared as if it was trying to forget about the pain. All 6 of his eyes were looking at Yongho. Yongho didn't dodge Agares' eyes. He released his mana while showing his 4 horns. Yong-ho tightened his grip on Aemon. Chapter 88. Mana was boiling within him while he was waiting. The flashy and extravagant demon world sky was responding positively to 2 manas. Everyone on the battlefield was looking at one area. Everyone was looking at Yong-ho and Agares. Agares was the first to move. Mana was focused on his destroyed back and on the area where his wing was ripped off. It wasn't like time was moving backwards. It was more like change. As Agares kicked off the ground, the injured area disappeared. In the area where the wings were, arms with blades at the end shot out, and several layers of new shells formed on his melted back. Fire and water, Agares changed his body so that it was more aggressive. As he got closer to Yong-ho, all 6 of his eyes were looking in different directions. He commanded while releasing an intimidating roar. Everyone on the battlefield cheered. Agares' real spirits, the insect-type monsters, cried out at the same time. And the monsters that ripped the landworms apart looked up. They listened to their owner and started moving. Hundreds of them cried towards the sky. The ground shook when they all jumped off the ground at the same time. The insect-type monsters charged towards Yong-ho from different directions. The battlefield was right outside the gate, and Agares had the advantage when it came to numbers. Yong-ho heard their cries as well. He also felt the ground shaking. But he didn't look away. He glared at the monsters that were charging at him. It was really intimidating. They were so violent that it felt like just looking at them could kill you. But he could go against them. Yong-ho thought about Aemon. He recalled the way Chwiryong looked down on him. He took a step forward and gave his command, Skull. A black storm broke through the monster's roar. Skull and the soldiers that followed were between Yong-ho and the monsters. Even though there were only about 10 of them, it was almost like an iron barrier. Catalina and Ophelia also moved. They were behind Yong-ho, and they became Yong-ho's blades. They charged towards Agares. Agares swung his 4 blades. His attacks were extremely violent. Catalina saw his attack. She naturally read his attacks. She moved to the right and dodged his blades. Ophelia did the same as Catalina. She moved her body to the left to dodge his attacks, and then after kicking off the ground, she attacked his side. Agares didn't have a choice but to slow down. He attacked his sides with his blades. He wasn't trying to dodge their attacks. He was trying to attack. Even though he was only using 2 blades, it was even more dangerous. Ophelia stopped breathing. It was different from the attacks that Catalina read. She felt his attacks. Ophelia used her red demon's physical ability and focused them on her legs. Then, she threw herself between his blades. Right after, she kicked off of Agares' body. Ophelia focused and attacked Agares' head. It was a strong attack, but his shell was too thick. Even though Agares' head was immediately bent down, he wasn't shocked by the attack. Ophelia wasn't disappointed. The moment she landed, she jumped back. She kept her guard up and looked at Agares' back. Catalina focused on her black mana. She found a weak spot on Agares' new shell. Since the new shell formed in areas where the old shell was destroyed, it was unbalanced, so Catalina used her dagger to pierce into his back. Catalina wasn't experienced in controlling her mana. That's why she performed the easiest attack. Her mana exploded. Agares felt the pain, but it was still weak. Catalina jumped off of Agares' back without any hesitation. Catalina looked ahead of Agares and looked at Yong-ho, and that made him mad. The moment Catalina and Ophelia turned their attention elsewhere, Agares attacked. Even though he had the body of a monster, he was a demon king. Lightning and thunder were released from Agares' body. They all exploded at the same time, and they enveloped both Catalina and Ophelia. There was a short scream. Catalina fell, and Ophelia endured it by gritting her teeth. Agares moved all 6 of his eyes. He was getting ready to swing his blades in different directions. And then there was fire. Agares saw the fire that was in front of him, so he started swinging his arms. Instead of going against the one that started the fire, he jumped off the ground. Agares threw himself in a direction that Yong-ho didn't expect. Catalina landed on her back. Ophelia gritted her teeth once more and turned her head. Agares was targeting the soldiers in the Free City. They came out of the city in order to protect Yong-ho and his spirits from the insect-type monsters. But now, they had to face Agares himself. The tall and large gigantes were the first ones to be sacrificed. The soldiers weren't able to dodge Agares' blades like Catalina and Ophelia did. The moment he swung his arms, their upper or lower body went flying. Agares destroyed 3 gigantes, but he didn't stop there. The slaughter that Oros was worried about was happening. Blood and corpses were flying in the air. Agares was covered in those, and the lightning that he released exploded, slaughtering more soldiers. Agares looked all around him at the same time. The insect-type monsters were starting to overpower the soldiers, and some of Agares' soldiers that came from other places were about to fight the soldiers that were in the free city. It wasn't a fight against 2 small groups. It was a fight against 2 big groups. What they wanted was for Agares to lead the war. One of Agares' eyes found a threat. Oros, the leader that Agares took down first, was on top of the gate and was charging at him through the blood and corpses that were in the air. Agares swung his sword. Oros swung his scimitar, and it clashed with the blade. But it was a bad move. Even though Oros drank a potion that helped him increase his strength, it wasn't enough to go up against Agares. His scimitar broke. Oros' right arm was cut off grease. The moment Agares was going to cut Oros' waist, a spell had been activated. The spell that Dagon cast made the ground beneath Agares slippery, and as Agares lost his balance, he swung his blade in the air. But it was only for a moment. Agares used his other feet to jump off the ground that wasn't slippery. He ignored Oros, who was in pain, and charged towards Dagon. Since Agares was moving too fast, Dagon gave up on casting another spell. He tightened his grip on his mace as he watched Agares kill the soldiers in front of him. Oros wasn't dumb. Catalina and Ophelia were the only ones that were able to dodge his attacks. It would be different if he wasn't fighting at all. But the moment he saw Agares, he knew that the only thing him and Dagon could do was block his attacks. Dagon concentrated. Agares broke through the bloody wall, and Dagon blocked his blades with his mace. The moment they clashed, his knee went out. He activated his ogre strength, and the moment he tried to push the blade, another blade cut his stomach. The fear he felt only lasted for a moment. Blood and internal organs were flowing out of his stomach. The blade that stabbed his side broke his bones. Dagon couldn't do anything, and the blade that was in his body cut Dagon's body vertically. Screams and cries filled the battlefield. Some expressed their fear, and that was affecting the others. And the insect-type monsters started killing off the free city soldiers. Death was everywhere. Oros started thinking, should he not have left the gate? Should he have watched Agares and his troops get murdered by the House of Mammon's owner? They were useless questions. If they can't stop in here, then it'll be over. Oros grew his severed arm. He was breathing heavily because he used too much of his energy, but he managed to lift his head and look at Agares. Agares was eating Dagon. His large teeth were painted with blood, and his eyes were moving in different directions. Oros knew that Agares was enjoying himself. He yelled. Catalina and Ophelia ran past Oros. The 2 charged towards Agares once again, and Agares, who was chewing Dagon's upper body, spat it out and turned his body. Out of the 6 eyes, 4 of them were on Catalina and Ophelia. The other 2 were searching the sky. Catalina and Ophelia had to take a bigger risk. Even though the number of blades and speed was the same as before, the situation on the battlefield changed. The large pool of blood and corpses disrupted their movements. Agares released more lightning. Instead of swinging his blades at them, he decided to release the lightning and make them explode. The shock started spreading. The ground was slippery and sticky. But Catalina and Ophelia didn't stop. They couldn't stop. They threw their bodies between the blades. They barely managed to dodge his attacks, but got closer to Agares. They attacked Agares with everything they had. Catalina made the black mana explode. Ophelia kicked one of Agares' legs and broke it. Agares endured the pain. Out of the 6 eyes, 2 of them were looking at Catalina and Ophelia. The other 4 were looking around to find the one that will soon arrive. A fiery tower shot down from the sky. Agares, who had been looking at the sky, swung both of his arms. He was trying to intimidate Catalina and Ophelia, and at the same time he jumped back to dodge the fiery tower. The fiery tower crashed into the ground. Agares saw Salami flying in the air with 2 of his eyes. Agares blinked. He noticed that the color of the fire was different from before, and no one was riding on Salamis' back. All 6 of his eyes were looking towards one direction. Swoosh! A green fire broke through the fiery tower. Yong-ho was enveloped in Greed's fire and broke through Salamis' fiery tower. Within seconds, he was near Agares. Agares swung his blades, but it was too late. Yong-ho was already close to him. Agares opened his mouth and shot out acid. It was bad for Yong-ho too. He was too close. While charging, he couldn't dodge the acid. That's why Yong-ho didn't back out. He took a step forward and raised his left arm. Kaiwan, he yelled. The power of distortion that was released from his left hand protected Yong-ho. The acid bounced against the wall of space, and a part of it landed on Agares' body. Kia Agares expressed his pain and anger. Yong-ho ignored it. He jumped up and stepped on Agares' leg. He pulled Amon back and looked at Agares' eye. It pierced. Amon's tip broke Agares' glass-like eye. At the same time, the tentacle that quickly grew from Agares' body pierced through Yong-ho's abdomen. Agares screeched. Yong-ho gritted his teeth and used his power. The green flame burned his eye. From there, the fire burned into Agares' head. This pain couldn't be compared to the first time his eye was attacked. He was jumping around crazily, and it was fine. He screamed like a madman, waving all four blades in different directions. The green flame escaped his eye and mouth. Yong-ho didn't attack him again. Amon transformed into a bracelet and fell on Agares. As soon as Yong-ho landed on the ground, he looked up and read the mana's flow. Agares' mana was raging. His will to live activated the regenerative power, and he focused his body's mana into one area. That's why Yong-ho was able to clearly see it. The area where Agares was focusing his mana. The area where Agares' spirit was located. Yong-ho tightened his grip on Amon again. Agares couldn't move because of the regenerative power, so Yong-ho looked at his abdomen. He pulled Amon back and produced a very hot fire. The single attack that broke through the steel ox that was on the first floor of the arena. Yong-ho remembered the things he learned from Amon. He was going to use them now. The lance pierced into his body. The hot fire broke Agares' shell. Amon broke through Agares' abdomen and destroyed the concentrated mana that was helping Agares regenerate. There was only one thing left. A radiant fire was released from Amon. It consumed Agares' spirit. Chapter 89. It was a lump of blue light. It was so beautiful that it was hard to believe that it came out of a terrifying monster like Agares. The fire enveloped the bright light. The tip of Amon became a part of Yong-ho, allowing him to consume Agares' spirit. He first felt pleasure, and then trembled. It was a big shock, which made it difficult for him to breathe. It was blue. It was a lightning type. Greed was awakened, and it consumed Agares' spirit through the fire. It suppressed its powers so that it wouldn't lose anything. Instead of swallowing it whole, Greed broke it apart into 1,000,000 pieces and thoroughly analyzed it. It's safe to say that one spirit was that family's history. There were traces of all the spirits that Agares had consumed up until now. They were useless. They were just traces that couldn't be used. But Greed didn't allow it. When Yong-ho's mana grew stronger, the power of evolution wasn't the only thing that grew, too. The spirit's color and element remained within the traces. It was different than the ones from before. It was impossible for Yong-ho to control the elements separately, like how he did with Foras coldness. But he could build it up, analyze it, and help his body to accept it. Color and element weren't the only things he acquired. Agares was a predator. He acquired new traits by eating, and that's how he evolved. It wasn't the power of a demon king. It was a natural trait that his race had. That trait. The power of evolution yelled. For the power of evolution, Greed stored that skill on one side of Yong-ho's mana. It was impossible for Yong-ho to use that skill. But it was possible for him to transfer that skill to someone with similar characteristics and strengthen their skill. Yuri. The princess aunt's face popped into his head. He then felt an exhilarating pleasure, interrupting his thoughts. Agares' spirit was bigger than any of the other spirits that Yong-ho consumed. It was really distorted, so it wasn't very pure, but the amount made up for it. It felt like his spirit and physical body were going to blow apart. He had to release his power. He was disappointed by the fact that he couldn't consume some of the power, but he had to release it. All the other demon kings had to do the same when they consume a spirit that was more than they could handle. but greed rejected this time too. If Yongho's body couldn't handle Agares mana, then it could make it so that his body can handle it. A new bowl, a larger and stronger bowl that can be filled with strong mana. The power of evolution was activated. Agares mana evolved Yongho's body. A flash of green light enveloped Yongho's entire body. It was restructuring Yongho's body. It was safe to say that he was obtaining a new body. His body was developing as mana was circulating within him, and the passages that had been blocked before were now open. His body became stronger. His bone got stronger as it contained more mana, and his physical skills increased. Yongho didn't forget about his wish. He grew a bit taller. His body looked a lot more appealing. And lastly, someone was cheering for Yongho's development. Armin, the Red Lotus Demon Lance, had been waiting for this moment. The moment where he won't have to suppress his powers. The moment where he'll be able to use his powers. Of course, Yongho was still lacking. He still had a long way to go. But it felt like he could take a step forward. He could use his powers a little more freely. Fire appeared on Yongho's wrist, which was still enveloped in the green light. The red fire transformed into a lance. Armin wanted to show his owner a part of his true form. Fire and fire. The green and red fire clashed against each other. Then it burned together and created a giant light. It disappeared with the wind. Yongho took a deep breath. It was the first breath he took after his body transformed. His senses became more sensitive. Even though his eyes were closed, it felt like he could feel everyone's presence really well. The transformation only took 10 seconds. But it was safe to say that time on the battlefield stopped during that time. The insect-type monsters realized that Agares died. Some of them became weak, and others started moving more violently. The spirits that weren't directly connected to Agares saw the enormous fire. They saw the lifeless Agares and realized that his shell was the only thing that was left. Agares was dead. He lost, and the owner of the House of Mammon, that demon king of fire, consumed his spirit. Here is the corrected and properly formatted paragraph for your audiobook script. I have fixed all spelling, spacing, and line break errors, separating dialogue and actions for clear narration. Yongho opened his eyes. Instead of looking at Agares' corpse, he looked elsewhere. He looked at Salami, who landed on the ground and looked slightly scared. "You're exhausted." Salami was the spirit that worked the hardest out of all the spirits that belonged to the House of Mammon. Salami calmed down when Yongho spoke and tried to smile with its eyes. Yongho patted Salami's nose and spoke, "Hang in there." Salami was confused and blinked, but Yongho didn't stop smiling. The fight wasn't over. Even though Agares was dead, his troops were still standing. Even though they were on the brink of collapsing, there were still over 100 spirits. Salamis' wings were at their limit. Yongho knew that too. That's why he said that earlier. With his new body, he gathered his mana and activated the power of evolution. Green flames rose up from his eyes, and he saw a box of light. Salamander, a salt-type development. The green light that appeared on the tip of Yongho's finger enveloped Salami's body. Salami roared. The wings grew bigger and stronger, and its body transformed into a more aggressive one. Salami's front feet and shoulder became bigger. The nails were sharper, and a scale that was similar to a dragon's protected Salami's body. Thorns grew on Salami's slim waist and tail. Salami was like an ordinary car before, but now it looked like an armored car. After the development finished, hot air was released from Salami's mouth. Yongho smiled and looked around. His eyes landed on Catalina and Ophelia. Catalina covered her face with her hands as her tail and ears flapped. The gap between her fingers was pretty big, so he was able to see her blue eyes filled with excitement and her red cheeks. Ophelia, on the other hand, had a smirk on her face. She signaled Yongho with her eyes. "Impressive." Yongho looked down, wondering what the two ladies were looking at, and when he realized, he laughed awkwardly and put his hands down. While his body was transforming, the fire burned everything. So he was naked. I was wondering why it was chilly. Yongho used his mana. After activating a dark green light, he used it to cover the lower part of his body and then got on Salami's back. "Shall we finish this?" Yongho spoke. Catalina and Ophelia both answered in their own ways. Salami spread its wings. After kicking off the ground and flapping its wings, a strong wind covered the ground. "My young owner," He heard Aemon's voice. Yong-ho swung his right arm, as if that was his reply to Aemon's calling. Just like his body, he wielded the lance's new form. The spirits that witnessed Agares' death were running away. The insect-type monsters were violently jumping around as if this was their last attempt at bringing Yong-ho down. Skull. He saw Skull, who was swinging its warhammer around. Yong-ho didn't wait any longer. Salami was circling around in the air, and he gave his command. Salami's fiery wings made the sky cloudy, the fiery lance that divided the battleground. He finished the battle, just like he had stated earlier. The fight with Agares was completely over 3 hours after the war started. The insect-type monsters didn't know how to quit or surrender. They had no choice but to kill each and every one of them. Most of the spirits that were under Agares' control after he devoured their owners ran away. The insects' violent movements gave them time to run away. When looking at just the results, the Free City won. Even though Agares had twice as many troops, they managed to defeat them and even brought down Agares himself. However, the Free City was damaged pretty badly as well. Out of the 3 leaders of the Free City, Dagon died. Despite the fact that trolls had strong regeneration skills, Oros fainted right before the war ended because of his injury. Out of the Free City soldiers, the elite soldiers that Ophelia commanded to go with Skull experienced the most damage. During the most important moment, they became Yong-ho's shield, so they fought the most enemies, and because of that, they had the most injuries. Out of the 3 leaders, Ophelia was in the best condition, so she took care of the soldiers. The Workers' Guild and the Outlaws were against following Ophelia's orders, but since Yong-ho was standing behind her, they kept their opinions to themselves. They didn't even have the strength to protest. They needed some time in order to make a complaint. Ophelia wasn't planning on standing by and watching them protest, but she wasn't going to pick on someone either. In the end, the Free City will belong to the House of Mammon. Oros probably realized that Ophelia was the House of Mammon's spirit before passing out, based on the way she talked. "I'll leave the Free City up to you." Yong-ho wore a suit that he obtained at the last minute and spoke while getting on the horse. Ophelia spoke worriedly while her tail moved weakly. "Is it really okay for you to start moving, Skull? And the others may be okay since they're an undead, but still, we don't have a lot of time." Yong-ho and Ophelia were standing in front of the gate. They haven't even finished cleaning up the corpses, but Yong-ho, Catalina, Skull, and the other spirits were outside. He didn't have enough time. If Agares died, it meant that the spirit of the dungeons that were under Agares' control died as well. No matter how many soldiers Agares had, they probably noticed that he died. The other owners in the east may have realized that there had been some changes going on in Agares' dungeon. While consuming Agares' spirit, there were a few things that Yong-ho realized. Agares was an actual predator. The reason why he was able to gather 10,000 soldiers was because he made the dungeons empty after he took over. It was impossible to take all the dungeons that were under his control, but he could at least take the 2 dungeons that were near the Free City. Things have already been delayed. He had to move now in fine. Ophelia looked at Catalina worriedly, so she spoke to both Ophelia and Yong-ho. Just like Yong-ho, she was exhausted since she was continuously fighting, but that didn't mean she was going to fall behind. Catalina was Yong-ho's personal guard. Salami worked the hardest, and despite letting out small cries, no one heard it. Yong-ho and Catalina got on Salami's back. Skull laughed while petting Nightmare's mane, and the Skull unit didn't look tired at all as they waited for everyone to start heading out. "I'll be back," Yong-ho spoke, and Ophelia gave up in the end. She showed respect by seeing him off. Enderlion's daughter. "Ophelia will gladly wait for your return." Sir Salami flapped its wings. It flew towards the east. Skull and Nightmare started galloping. The Skull unit followed their leader Ophelia, who was now alone, brushed back her gold hair. She looked at the House of Mammon's spirits who were heading to the east. She recalled the face her father made when he shouted that the House of Mammon was going to be revived. Chapter 90, Mighty Warrior 3. He didn't have enough time. If Agares died, it meant that the spirits of the dungeons that were under Agares' control died as well. No matter how many soldiers Agares had, they probably noticed that he died. The other owners in the east may have realized that there had been some changes going on in Agares' dungeon. While consuming Agares' spirit, there were a few things that Yong-ho realized. Agares was an actual predator. The reason why he was able to gather 100 soldiers was because he made the dungeons empty after he took over. It was impossible to take all the dungeons that were under his control, but he could at least take the 2 dungeons that were near the free city. Things have already been delayed. He had to move now. Fine. Ophelia looked at Catalina worriedly, so she spoke to both Ophelia and Yong-ho. Just like Yong-ho, she was exhausted since she was continuously fighting, but that didn't mean she was going to fall behind. Catalina was Yong-ho's personal guard. Salami worked the hardest, and despite letting out small cries, no one heard it. Yong-ho and Catalina got on Salami's back. Skull laughed while petting Nightmare's mane, and the Skull unit didn't look tired at all as they waited for everyone to start heading out. "He'll be back," Yong-ho spoke, and Ophelia gave up in the end. She showed respect by seeing him off, and Daleon's daughter Ophelia will gladly wait for your return, so Salami flapped its wings. It flew towards the east. Skull Nightmare started galloping. The Skull unit followed their leader Ophelia, who was now alone, brushed back her gold hair. She looked at the House of Mammon's spirits, who were heading to the east. Here is the corrected and properly formatted paragraph, but he could go against them. Yong-ho thought about Aemon. He recalled the way Gusion looked down on him. He took a step forward and gave his command. Skull. A black storm broke through the monster's roar. Skull and the soldiers that followed were between Yong-ho and the monsters. Even though there were only about 10 of them, it was almost like an iron barrier. Catalina and Ophelia also moved. They were behind Yong-ho, and they became Yong-ho's blades. They charged towards Agares. Agares swung his 4 blades. His attacks were extremely violent. Catalina saw his attack and naturally read its trajectory. She moved to the right and dodged his blades. Ophelia did the same as Catalina. She moved her body to the left to dodge his attack, and then, after kicking off the ground, she attacked his side. Agares didn't have a choice but to slow down. He attacked his sides with his blades. He wasn't trying to dodge their attacks. He was trying to attack. Even though he was only using 2 blades, it was even more dangerous. Ophelia stopped breathing. It was different from the attacks that Catalina read. She felt his attacks. Ophelia used her red demon's physical ability and focused it on her legs. Then, she threw herself between his blades. Right after, she kicked off Agares' body. Ophelia focused and attacked Agares' head. It was a strong attack, but his shell was too thick. Even though Agares' head was immediately bent down, he wasn't shocked by the attack. Ophelia wasn't disappointed. The moment she landed, she jumped back. She kept her guard up and looked at Agares' back. Catalina focused on her black mana. She found a weak spot on Agares' new shell. Since the new shell formed in areas where the old shell was destroyed, it was unbalanced, so Catalina used her dagger to pierce into his back. Catalina wasn't experienced in controlling her mana. That's why she performed the easiest attack. Her mana exploded. Agares felt the pain, but it was still weak. Catalina jumped off of Agares' back without any hesitation. Catalina looked ahead of Agares and looked at Yong-ho, and that made him mad. The moment Catalina and Ophelia turned their attention elsewhere, Agares attacked. Even though he had the body of a monster, he was a demon king. Lightning and thunder were released from Agares' body. They enveloped both Catalina and Ophelia. There was a short scream. Catalina fell, and Ophelia endured it by gritting her teeth. Agares moved all 6 of his eyes. He was getting ready to swing his blades in different directions, and then there was fire. Agares saw the fire that was in front of him, so he started swinging his arms. Instead of going against the one that started the fire, he jumped off the ground. Agares threw himself in a direction that Yong-ho didn't expect. Catalina landed on her back. Ophelia gritted her teeth once more and turned her head. Agares was targeting the soldiers in the free city. They came out of the city in order to protect Yong-ho and his spirits from the insect-type monsters. But now, they had to face Agares himself. The tall and large gigantes were the first sacrifices. The soldiers weren't able to dodge Agares' blades like Catalina and Ophelia did. The moment he swung his arms, their upper and lower bodies went flying. Agares destroyed 3 gigantes, but he didn't stop there. The slaughter that Oros was worried about was happening. Blood and corpses flew in the air. Agares was covered in those, and the lightning that he released exploded, slaughtering more soldiers. Agares looked all around him at the same time. The insect-type monsters were starting to overpower the soldiers, and some of Agares' soldiers that came from other places were about to fight the soldiers that were in the free city. It wasn't a fight against two small groups. It was a fight against two big groups. What they wanted was for Agares to lead the battle. One of Agares' eyes found a threat. Oros, the leader that Agares took down first, was on top of the gate and was charging at him through the blood and corpses that were in the air. Agares swung his sword. Oros swung his scimitar, and it clashed with the blade. But it was a bad move. Even though Oros drank a potion that helped him increase his strength, it wasn't enough to go up against Agares. His scimitar broke. Oros' right arm was cut off grease. The moment Agares was going to cut Oros' waist, a spell had been activated. The spell that Dagon casted made the ground beneath Agares slippery, and as Agares lost his balance, he swung his blade in the air. But it was only for a moment. Agares used his other feet to jump off the ground that wasn't slippery. He ignored Oros, who was in pain, and charged towards Dagon. Since Agares was moving too fast, Dagon gave up on casting another spell. He tightened his grip on his mace as he watched Agares kill the soldiers in front of him. Oros wasn't dumb. Catalina and Ophelia were the only ones that were able to dodge Agares' attacks. It would be different if he wasn't fighting at all, but the moment he saw Agares, he knew that the only thing him and Dagon could do was block his attacks. Dagon concentrated. Agares broke through the bloody wall, and Dagon blocked his blades with his mace. The moment they clashed, his knee went out. He activated his ogre strength, and the moment he tried to push the blade, another blade cut his stomach. The fear he felt only lasted for a moment. Blood and internal organs flowed out of his stomach. The blade that stabbed his side broke his bones. Dagon couldn't do anything, and the blade that was in his body vertically cut his body. Screams and cries filled the battlefield. Some expressed their fear, and that was affecting the others. And the insect-type monsters started killing off the free city soldiers. Death was everywhere. Oros started thinking, should he not have left the gate? Should he have watched Agares and his troops get murdered by the House of Mammon's owner? They were useless questions. If they couldn't stop him here, then it would be all over. Oros regrew his severed arm. He was breathing heavily because he had used too much of his energy, but he managed to lift his head and look at Agares. Agares was eating Dagon. His large teeth were painted with blood, and his eyes were moving in different directions. Oros knew that Agares was enjoying himself. He yelled. Catalina and Ophelia ran past Oros. The two charged towards Agares once again, and Agares, who was chewing Dagon's upper body, spat it out and turned his body. Out of the 6 eyes, 4 of them were on Catalina and Ophelia. The other 2 were searching the sky. Catalina and Ophelia had to take a bigger risk. Even though the number of blades and speed was the same as before, the situation on the battlefield had changed. The large pool of blood and corpses disrupted their movements. Agares released more lightning. Instead of swinging his blades at them, he decided to release the lightning and make them explode. The shock started spreading. The ground was slippery and sticky. But Catalina and Ophelia didn't stop. They couldn't stop. They threw their bodies between the blades. They barely managed to dodge his attacks, but still got closer to Agares. They attacked Agares with everything they had. Catalina made her black mana explode. Ophelia kicked one of Agares' legs and broke it. Agares endured the pain. Out of the 6 eyes, 2 of them were looking at Catalina and Ophelia. The other 4 were now looking around to find the one that would soon arrive. A fiery tower shot down from the sky. Agares, who had been looking at the sky, swung both of his arms. He was trying to intimidate Catalina and Ophelia, and at the same time, he jumped back to dodge the fiery tower. The fiery tower crashed into the ground. Agares saw Salami flying in the air with 2 of his eyes. Agares blinked. He noticed that the color of the fire was different from before, and no one was riding on Salami's back. All 6 of his eyes were looking towards one direction. Swoo! A green fire broke through the fiery tower. Young Ho was enveloped in Greed's fire and broke through Salami's fiery tower. Within seconds, he was near Agares. Agares swung his blades, but it was late. Young Ho was already close to him. Agares opened his mouth and shot out acid. It was bad for Young Ho too. He was too close. While charging, He couldn't dodge the acid. That's why Yong-ho didn't back out. He took a step forward and raised his left arm. Kaiwan, he yelled. The power of distortion that was released from his left hand protected Yong-ho. The acid bounced against the wall of space, and a part of it landed on Agares' body. Kiahahades expressed his pain and anger. Yong-ho ignored it. He jumped up and stepped on Agares' leg. He pulled Amon back and looked at Agares' eye. It pierced. Amon's tip broke through Agares' glass-like eye. At the same time, the tentacle that quickly grew from Agares' body pierced through Yong-ho's abdomen. Agares screeched. Yong-ho gritted his teeth and used his power. The green flames burned Agares' eye. From there, the fire burned into Agares' head. This pain couldn't be compared to the first time his eye was attacked. Agares jumped around crazily. He screamed while waving all 4 blades in different directions. Green flames escaped his eyes and mouth. Yong-ho didn't attack him again. Amon transformed into a bracelet and fell on Yong-ho's wrist. As soon as Yong-ho landed on the ground, he looked up and read the mana's flow. Agares' mana was raging. His will to live activated his regenerative power, and he focused his body's mana into one area. That's why Yong-ho was able to clearly see it. The area where Agares was focusing his mana. The area where Agares' spirit was located. Yong-ho wielded Amon again. Agares couldn't move because of the regenerative power, so Yong-ho looked at his abdomen. He pulled Amon back and produced a very hot fire. The single attack that broke through the steel ox that was on the first floor of the arena. Yong-ho remembered the things he learned from Amon. He was going to use them now. The lance pierced into Agares' body. The hot fire broke Agares' shell. Amon broke through Agares' abdomen and destroyed the concentrated mana that was helping Agares regenerate. There was only one thing left. A radiant fire was released from Amon. He consumed Agares' spirit.